The shifting shop. Let me introduce myself. I am Fran Hart, proprietor of fabulous Frocks and happy Haberdashery. The name is a bit of a mouthful, but a truly unique shop naturally deserves a name to match. And my humble establishment here is truly one of a kind. If you just stopped in to try on a few dresses or rummaged through some cufflinks, you'd certainly notice nothing special. A normal exterior is essential for keeping both the shop and my clients safe. And the revenue from the handmade clothes in the front room helps me pay the rent and put food on the table. As you all understand, appearances and true nature rarely align. While I love making dresses and collecting beautiful accessories, my true passion lies in a completely different profession. In fact, this entire shop is just a facade so I can provide that service discreetly. When you deal in something so unique, anonymity is everything. You wouldn't think I'd be foolish enough to reveal my real name, would you? I'm content running the front, but I truly live for the moments I can use my real expertise. That other profession is much more challenging, and it brings a more extraordinary sense of accomplishment. Each time a client steps in, the doorbell chimes, and I serve them normally until they utter the predetermined passphrase. At that moment, my heart leaps, and I set about fulfilling their request. For these special clients, I offer a complete bodily transformation, and I mean complete in the most literal sense possible. My clients walk in with their old appearance and walk out a completely different person. Who among us doesn't want to shed their old skin to try something new now and then? What's wrong with a little change? I have a vast inventory of hundreds of forms, or skins, as my former clients have left them to me in exchange for an entirely new look. People come to me for all sorts of reasons, but rarely for positive ones. I don't judge. If I did, my profits would surely plummet. But the exact location of the shop is often found only by those in despair, in fear, or needing to escape someone or something they are. Most are surprised to discover that their friendly neighbor, Fran Hart, is the one they've been searching for, that the service they desperately need is right here in this inconspicuous little shop at the end of the street. However, the girl I served this afternoon was different. I had never seen her before. Perhaps she came from out of town. I wouldn't be surprised if rumors of the shop had spread further than my local area. In fact, just a few days ago, I had another client from out of town. This girl was quite pretty, slender, with golden blonde hair that could have been natural or cost a small fortune to achieve that exact shade. She approached the counter where I was seated, flipping through a fabric catalog and circling samples for a future order. "Excuse me, are you Fran Hart?" she asked cautiously, her blue eyes darting back and forth. "You've found the right person," I replied, rising to my full height before her. I am naturally tall. "I need a dress," she said. "I've just released some stunning new designs, a sweetheart neckline would emphasize." The young girl shook her head vigorously. "No, Fran, I know you sell more than dresses." Blinking slowly, I decided to play dumb. I'm very good at it, so much so that I could have had a promising acting career if fate hadn't led me to run this shop. "I'm sorry, dear, I don't quite understand what you mean." "Oh, goodness," she muttered, rolling her eyes at her own mistake. I want to see what you have in the back room. I'm interested in a custom fitting." My passphrase is as discreet as the shop itself. Without another word, I walked to the front door and locked it, flipping the sign from "We're open, come on in," to "Oh, we're closed." I gestured for the girl to follow me with a wave of my hand as I pulled back the black curtain on the wall behind the cash register. We both ducked under the threshold into the back room. A vast storage space was littered with mannequins, some dressed, some nude, a large table occupying the center of the room, with a pair of chairs tucked around a corner of the table. I pointed to one chair and then sat in the other, facing her. A bewildered expression crossed the girl's face. Where are they? Don't I get to look through them?" "Not exactly," I replied, indicating the chair opposite me. I waited until she was seated before continuing. "This isn't the type of shopping you're used to, but the system is quite simple, and I intend to keep it that way. There's no browsing, no trying on. You tell me what you want, what kind of change you're looking for, and why, and then I'll use that information to give you the transformation you need." Okay. She nodded in agreement, though I still sensed a hint of discomfort. "How much does this cost?" "No more than what you're willing to give up," I sighed, picking up the notepad left on the table and clicking open my pen. You'll lose your old appearance once I've placed you in a new form. From there, I'll use it as I wish, perhaps to clothe another, perhaps to dispose of. It depends. Nodding slowly, she seemed to be deliberating internally, weighing whether the terms were worth the value of my service. All of them do, and all of them say, do it, in the end. Smiling warmly, I said, excellent. Now, start by telling me why you need such a drastic change. Well, she began shyly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I just got out of a bad marriage. As I took notes, I interjected, good for you, finally found the courage to put yourself first. She chuckled softly before responding. Well, when he went to prison, it made things a lot easier to cut ties. Oh, I raised an eyebrow. He's serving a life sentence for a few murders and a host of other charges, she explained, sighing. There were about 10 victims or more. When I met him, he was just the kindest man I'd ever met, a true gentleman. But over time, he changed. Or perhaps I just saw his true self. He quickly became controlling, demeaning, and sometimes even physically abusive. I only saw how monstrous he was when I came home early from a family visit one evening, and he had a girl tied up in the bedroom. I didn't know what to do. I panicked and stood there frozen, she explained, closing her eyes for a moment. My husband was very manipulative. He calmed me down and convinced me not to tell anyone. I don't know what happened to that girl either. Exhaling sharply, I asked, but then there were many other victims. The young girl nodded. He said the dark side inside him needed to be released, that he would be a better husband if I let him do it. And he actually treated me better after that night. No more hitting, just like the man I fell in love with. I could get some strong prescription drugs at work, and he convinced me to steal some for him, saying that if he gave them to the girls, they wouldn't remember what happened. And you did. Yes, I did, she admitted, her posture appearing even smaller as she spoke. I knew it was wrong, but I was so afraid of him, I still did it. He treated me so kindly that things seemed okay in a strange way. This went on for several years, but I always left after giving him the drugs. I only discovered he had escalated to murder when I caught him stuffing a large duffel bag into the back of his truck. It was the body of one of his victims. Tears fell from her bright eyes as she continued. The police caught him soon after. I avoided charges thanks to my testimony, and because I helped find some videos as evidence. But I've become a complete outcast in the community. I'll never be able to move on with my life with this appearance. But more than that, I'm afraid my husband will find me if he successfully appeals. She cried softly for a few minutes before pulling a crumpled tissue from her purse and blowing her nose. I finished my notes, even though I already knew exactly what to do with her. I know exactly what will fit you, I declared, standing up to gather my supplies. A plastic tarp, a jar of bright green solution, a pair of fabric shears, a large needle, and a spool of thick thread. Spreading the tarp on the table, I gestured for her to get onto it. Oh, and drink this, I added, handing her the small bottle of solution. Shrugging, she tilted her head back and poured the entire bright green liquid down her throat in one gulp. She fell unconscious almost immediately, and I began my work. First, I cut along her torso, branching out to her limbs, hands, feet, and finally her face. My tools are unlike any other. These special fabric shears glide cleanly through flesh with very little blood. I peeled the skin from her body, starting with the large sections, then moving to each individual finger and toe. With this girl now a blank slate, I went to the locker compartment along the back wall, using a key to unlock a considerable collection of forms. These are, in essence, a series of hollow human skins preserved by some unknown force. Flipping through the collection, I found the form I had chosen and removed it from its hanger before draping it over an arm to carry back to the table. Spreading it evenly underneath is the hardest part, but once that's done, the transformation process is completed soon after. Moving from the periphery inwards, I stitched the new form tightly around the young girl, piercing the needle through the skin and pulling the thick thread to form tight stitches. Like the shears, these supplies have unique properties. The spool of thread never runs out, and the thread dissolves into the skin as I work, bonding the flesh seamlessly. I wish I could say where these supplies came from, but I am not the original owner of this shop. In the old days, I was just a client myself. The young girl began to stir about 20 minutes after I completed my work. I like to do dramatic reveals, much like the makeover shows on television, so I had tied a blindfold over her eyes. "Don't worry, dear," I soothed, bending down to take her hand. "Let me lead you to the mirror." With a bit of effort, she sat up and stepped off the table, following me to an ornate standing mirror in the corner of the room. Loosening the blindfold, I let it fall to the floor as she gazed upon her new form. "What the hell? What is this?" she cried out, eyes wide with astonishment as she stepped closer to her reflection. I had dressed her in a new form recently acquired from a skinny girl with short, mousy brown hair, riddled with scars and a perpetually tired expression. "This is you now," I replied, though this did little to ease the young girl's unease. "I got this form from a recent client. She came to me because she only felt pain whenever she looked in the mirror but never understood why. She cut her hair short, gashed herself with razors all over her body, starved herself to near death, but still couldn't find the source of the pain within. Until a few months ago, when a police officer informed her that she had been identified as one of the victims of a predator they had just caught. He kept video recordings of what he did to these girls. All of them were drugged into unconsciousness," I explained, sighing heavily. "When you came in here and started telling the story of what your husband had done, it didn't take long for me to piece it together. She was one of his victims." Her lower lip trembled as she stammered, "But I didn't do anything to her." A short laugh escaped my lips. "I know, child, but that's the problem. You did nothing to stop him, and you provided him with the tools to continue, and she had to live with all this pain, partly because of you." My voice softened. I continued, "I believe your fear of him prevented you from speaking up. However, I couldn't let you leave the shop without ensuring that you wouldn't let something similar happen again. The pain you feel in your body is the pain she endured for years. That pain now belongs to you," I explained, sweeping my hand over the myriad of raised, pink scars that covered the new skin encasing her arms. "This pain will be a daily reminder to do something, say something next time. God forbid there's a next time. You must prevent something similar from happening." Through her tears, she nodded in silent acceptance before gathering her belongings. I led her to the front of the shop and stood watching to make sure she got safely into her car. It was past normal closing hours, so I turned the deadbolt on the door as soon as her car pulled away from the street, pulling out a half-empty bottle of bourbon from under the counter to pour myself a few fingers. Sometimes I need a little help to unwind after a long day's work, and proper rest is crucial. Tomorrow is a new day, and a new day means more clients. I understand many of you will feel I was too lenient with her, but I believed her. I try to see the good in people, even in such dark situations. And for those who think I was too harsh in deciding her new appearance, she knew exactly what she was getting into. The risks were fully disclosed. I tell her, and every client who seeks a custom fitting, that at Fran Hart's fabulous Frocks and happy Haberdashery, you don't always get what you want, but I always ensure my clients get what they need. I truly appreciate you being so interested in the stories coming in and out of my little shop. This profession is my passion, but because I always kept it almost absolutely private, I wasn't sure how others would receive it. I must confess, I held my breath when I told the story of the last client. But I am immensely glad I did. It felt like a weight was lifted from my chest to finally be able to share such an important part of myself after hiding for so long. I want to clarify a few things from the other day before telling today's story. First, someone asked how I handle returning clients. You're right to think I have some dissatisfied clients, those whose assigned appearance didn't align with what they imagined when they came in. While I assign forms based on what I believe is necessary, I also know that human needs change over time. While many clients accept this, and many of the forms I assign are more positive than the previous story, I still have former clients who come seeking what I call a refitting. When this happens, the interview process is repeated to determine what has changed since the last meeting, and more importantly, what, if anything, they have learned from living in another person's skin. I have completed refittings, and actually I'm quite open to them. Since most of my appearances are decided in a more positive direction, there's a sense of permanence in my choices because many clients don't request a change. These cases often make for less interesting stories for this audience, though I have jotted down a few that might be suitable for later. That said, there's still a reevaluation process to see if I was too harsh or if the desired appearance has been achieved yet. I'll share a case or two like that with you when the time is right. Back to work as luck would have it. Yesterday, another client came to me for a custom fitting. He was a neat, middle-aged man with a charming smile, wearing expensive-looking t-shirt and jeans. I knew immediately he was looking for more than a new tie as soon as he walked into the shop, because he wore a baseball cap and sunglasses to conceal his identity, to blend into the crowd. Clearly, he didn't want to be seen, or rather, he needed a change to ensure he could hide in plain sight. Even so, I waited for him to come to the counter and murmur, I'm looking for a custom fitting," before revealing himself. "Of course, sir," I replied, closing the shop before drawing back the black curtain with one hand to move the discussion into the back room. I spent a few minutes explaining the terms of the custom fitting to him as we sat down. He agreed to everything immediately, seemingly without a moment's consideration. With his fully informed consent, we proceeded to the interview portion of the fitting, my notepad in my lap and pen ready. "So, sir, what brings you here today?" I asked. "I'm here because my career just took a major hit, one I don't think I can recover from," he began, reluctantly removing his sunglasses and hat to reveal a familiar face, a face that evoked immediate recognition. I suppressed a reaction, instead focusing my energy on frantically taking notes. "I wouldn't be surprised if you know me, but if not, I'm a politician for this area. I'm finishing up my first term, and I was running for re-election." It looked like victory was in hand until recently. I asked a question I already knew the answer to. What happened? The politician wrung his hands restlessly in his lap. "I attended a social event a few weeks ago, and I was overly confident. I drank too much and let my guard down. The conversation turned to politics, as it always does, and I made some unsavory remarks about my opponent," he explained, hesitating slightly. "Some, racist remarks," he whispered, as if the entire city didn't already know. "Someone recorded my stupid rant on their phone, and the footage was played on every major news station just a few days later. This certainly wasn't the first time I've been caught in an embarrassing position with my statements. But this is the first time people actually noticed and cared. The public even forgave me when it was revealed that I had participated in a racially motivated assault when I was younger, but badmouthing was apparently a step too far." Catching himself straying from the point, he cleared his throat softly before finding his train of thought again. "Listen, I know I'm not, politically correct, but you have to understand that I wasn't in my right mind at the time. I mean, everyone says stupid things when they're drunk, right?" "One could say that," I replied noncommittally, not looking up from my notepad. He sighed dramatically as he emphasized, "I'm not just here because my career, everything I've worked so hard for, is ruined through no real fault of my own, but there's more to it. I come from a family that demands excellence, prominence in society. From childhood, I was expected to follow my father and enter politics. I didn't truly want that, but more than that, I didn't want to disappoint my family, so I dedicated myself to that path. However, there was a problem. I truly lack the qualities necessary to be a successful politician. I am naturally introverted, and I have poor communication skills. I was a remarkably average student, lacking motivation or ambition or anything resembling confidence," he admitted, shaking his head at what he perceived as his own shortcomings. "So when I met a group of people who could change that for me, I seized the opportunity. They were a secret, very influential organization, unknown to the public. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse, as they say. They would perform a ritual to bestow upon me the charisma I always lacked. A silver tongue that would guide me through the ranks to political success," the man declared. Slightly skeptical, I reminded myself to consider the possibility of such a procedure. I mean, given the unbelievable nature of my own profession, I really had no reason to doubt his story. A ritual. The politician smiled awkwardly, as if he understood the absurdity of his own statement. "Yes, a ritual," he confirmed, adjusting his posture. At his perfect posture, I suddenly realized my shoulders were slumped, my neck bent over my notepad. I was skeptical at first, too, but my desperation for success drove me to their heavily guarded headquarters. The men wore black cloaks, and they led me to a large, unfinished basement. In the center of the room, one of the men laid out a chalice of water, a candle, and a pile of small, scattered seeds. Then he used a knife to carve an intricate symbol into the earthen floor, lit the candle, and placed the knife beside the other items. The man explained. They began chanting, and I just stood there, confused as hell, until a shadowy figure appeared in the middle of the room. It had the body of a man with a thick book in its hand. I understood that the shadow couldn't just be a man when I saw its face, or rather, its faces, he clarified, grimacing at his own recollection. Its head was just a compilation of faces fused together in a sickening, overlapping way. The lower half of a beautiful woman's face was obscured by the snarling mouth of a fierce-looking man. It was disgusting. He hesitated slightly before continuing. The leader of this organization spoke to it by the name Dantalion and asked for its teachings on politics and charisma, its assistance in my rise to power. All at once, I knew everything I needed to know to be a successful politician. It also revealed the secret thoughts of powerful people I would come into contact with. Secrets that would be useful as I advanced to the top. Such things rarely come without a price, I murmured carefully. The politician chuckled softly in spite of himself, as if he wished he had thought more carefully beforehand. In return, I would obey this secret organization throughout my career. And if I wavered in my loyalty, or if I lost public favor, I would no longer be useful to them, and they would come to collect their debt by taking my life. Nodding, I deduced, and now you're certainly going to lose the election. They'll surely come to collect on that debt. I took a moment to review my notes, tutting softly as I considered the key information before declaring, I have just the thing. I won't bore you with another lengthy description of the custom fitting process. It's largely the same across clients. I suppose the reveal is what many are more interested in. The politician woke up almost immediately after the fitting was complete, and I eagerly led him to the mirror before removing his blindfold. What? He asked groggily, running a hand over his now bald head, staring with an open mouth at his new form. The man I acquired this form from came to me years ago, tattooed from head to toe. As you'll see, there are many intricate tattoos covering his arms and legs, plus a rather daring neck tattoo, I explained, pointing to the large letters etched into his neck spelling out, off. The real highlight of this form, though, is the face tattoo, I said, gesturing towards the tattoo that stretched across the left side of his new face, an intricate design that extended over his natural features to create an entirely new visage. The area around his eyes was darkened to create a hollowed-out appearance, and a grotesque inked smile was drawn from the corners of his lips. A detailed horn was etched across the left side of his forehead. You swore up and down that you were accepting and tolerant of all people, but your actions and words have shown otherwise. You were always two-faced, just like Dantalion. Now it's just outwardly visible on your form. My career is ruined, he remarked, blinking. I'll never be able to run for office again. I'd say you ruined your own career, I countered, taking a deep breath to add. You were right about one thing. This isn't the first time you've used your power to cause harm, and I don't believe it would have been the last. You spent years in office belittling entire groups of people. You beat a man simply because of the color of his skin and got away with it unscathed because of your connections. But not this time. You showed no remorse or desire to change your behavior, so I deemed this fitting. The man stammered as he tried to find words to argue against my decision, staring open-mouthed at his reflection in the mirror. I cut him off, preemptively, frustrated at the thought that he might not be taken seriously because of an aspect of his appearance that he couldn't control. Be silent. You still get to leave this place with your life. You're in better shape than when you arrived. You might even learn a thing or two from this. And while I don't think having tattoos says anything about a person's competence, I know the current system, the one you've played and benefited from for years, will reject you the moment they see you. A man like you shouldn't have a place in politics. I know it's been a while since the last update, but saying I've been busy is an understatement. For those of you just joining us, I'm Fran Hart of Fran Hart's fabulous Frocks and happy Haberdashery. To most acquaintances, I'm just a simple seamstress and shop owner, but I provide a very special service for those in the know, a complete bodily transformation for clients in need of an entirely new identity. My clients may not always get what they want, but I ensure they get what they need. Some of you were curious about whether I accept children or teenagers for the custom fitting service. I myself have only done it once, but I know it was done before I took over the shop. Though not often, I confess I was quite shocked to find the forms that proved it in the closet. While I consider these cases more carefully, I did provide a custom fitting for a young girl who was clearly and immediately in danger, the kind of danger that couldn't be resolved with more traditional measures. This girl, then only 13 years old, came to me a few years ago. I have a collection for children in the front of the shop, so I thought she was just coming in to try on something for a school dance, maybe a nice dress for Sunday. It wasn't until she came to the counter that I knew she was looking for more than just an addition to her wardrobe. She wore baggy sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. The hood was pulled up over her head, her hair hidden, and she walked carefully with her head down. When she finally looked up at me, her face betrayed her before she confirmed my suspicions by whispering, I'm interested in the custom fitting service." I closed the front of the shop, turned off the lights, and drew the curtains. Additional security measures must be taken in these situations. Before leading her into the back room, I invited her to sit at the table before explaining the process to her, taking care to be very thorough in my explanation. Once she agreed, I began the consultation. "What brings you here today, my dear?" The little girl quickly glanced around the room before starting. Well, I haven't had an easy life," she said in a soft voice, her body visibly tense in the chair. "I'm the oldest in my family. I have 2 younger brothers and my parents always treated me differently. I guess I was different too, but I always felt like I was, well, the black sheep of the family. My parents were like that with me too, never really understanding me," I offered with a warm smile. "But I'm sorry, that sounds truly difficult." The little girl relaxed a bit, pulling down her hood to reveal short, choppy black hair and a dark, oval-shaped birthmark in the center of her forehead. Looking at her facial features, she appeared underweight, though it was hard to tell for sure due to her baggy clothes. "Yes, it was," she mumbled. "My parents were very distant when I was young, and my brothers didn't really want anything to do with me either. I think that's why I always had, problems with other people, especially when I started school. The smallest thing would set me off. I'd get mad at another kid for taking a toy I wanted, or I'd get frustrated with a teacher, and I'd just explode. I'd flip tables and swing my arms at anyone who tried to come near me. A few years ago, my parents decided to pull me out of school. By then, I had learned the basics of reading, writing, and math, and picking me up early a few days a week was more trouble than teaching me at home. But they didn't really teach much, though I loved learning, as long as I got to choose what I learned." The young girl sighed, a clear sadness in her hazel brown eyes. "They didn't seem to care about me or my future at all, never asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up." Looking up from my notepad, I asked, "And what do you want to be when you grow up, my dear?" She shrugged lazily, as if indifferent to my question, but a faint smile betrayed her. "I always wanted to make things, like jewelry or something. I'm really good at it. I didn't care much for what they taught at school, but I loved creating things. My parents kind of let me do the beating but never tried to do it with me. I taught myself a lot about what it takes to have a jewelry shop, like stringing and money math. I'm sure they just faked all the work to prove I was learning everything I was supposed to be learning." She scoffed, shaking her head. "It sounds weird, but I was pretty happy during the times they left me alone. They started paying more attention to me when I was 12, and not in a good way." I jotted down a note, a sinking feeling spreading in my stomach. "What do you mean?" I still had real difficulty getting along with my family. It's hard to explain, but I'd get angry and just see red. My brothers were running around the house screaming once, and the next thing I knew, the kitchen was destroyed. I didn't even realize what I had done until I saw broken dishes on the floor, the table flipped over. She confessed timidly, blinking. The little girl suddenly looked over her shoulder, then back at me. My parents believed I was possessed or something. They looked up some stuff online and decided to try an exorcism. They'd hold me down and scream Bible verses in my face. I'd just scream back. I didn't know what they were doing, and nothing ever got better. They barely fed me, and I lost a lot of weight. I tried to control my behavior, but it was hard when I felt like no one cared enough to ask what was wrong, felt like no one cared about me at all. Last night, I had another one of my outbursts. I was making beads, and my mom was yelling at me to put them away and go to bed. I kept telling her I just needed to string a few more beads and I'd be done. But she just snatched the necklace from the table, and all the beads went flying, scattering across the floor, the little girl explained, wringing her hands together, her bony knuckles protruding. I came to and found I had smashed the table lamp and ripped out all the drawers. As the little girl paused, I took a moment to catch up on my notes. What happened after that? Her lower lip trembling, she replied, "They called a friend from church to help with another, and in another exorcism. They tied my hands and feet to the bedpost and the screaming started again. I really hate loud noises. It just makes me scared. I didn't know what to do, didn't know what they wanted from me, so I just thrashed around on the bed, crying and screaming. I finally just closed my eyes. A few minutes later, I heard the door bang open. I opened my eyes and saw a strange man in a black hat standing next to the man from the church on my bed. Well, kind of. His body was there for a moment before it slumped to the floor, but his head was in the stranger's hand, cleanly severed. She continued, tears welling in her eyes. My parents cowered from the stranger. The man slowly stepped towards me, placing his thumb on my birthmark. He chuckled softly to himself as he said, "Almost." Then he left. "Who was he?" I asked carefully. The little girl hung her head and sniffled. "I don't know, but it seemed like my parents knew. I demanded they tell me what was going on. They said that my mom couldn't have children. And after years of trying everything the doctors suggested, they summoned a demon or something. He offered them the ability to create a family in exchange for ownership of their firstborn. And that was me." I exhaled. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Exactly. Now they expected that they just had to have me and give me away, but they didn't fully understand what they had agreed to. When I was born, the strange man visited to tell them he would come back for me later when I became a woman to take me as one of his wives. My parents tried to fight it. They didn't want to get to know me all those years only to have to give me up. My dad said they would run away and take me with them. But the strange man bent down to me and pressed his thumb to my forehead, etching a mark into my skin. He said that way, he would always be able to find me. She sobbed, frantically rubbing her palm over the dark discoloration in the center of her forehead as if to erase it. My mom and dad shunned me because they didn't want to love me, didn't want to have hope for my future when I had no future. She raged before finally breaking down into uncontrollable sobs. I pushed the box of tissues closer to her on the table, tears also stinging my own eyes. The little girl wiped her tears and blew her nose on a tissue. "Thank you," she mumbled, her voice hoarse. My mom and dad used the exorcisms as a last-ditch effort to get the strange man to leave me alone, starved me so I wouldn't have my first period, to buy me time. I ran away from home early this morning to find you. I had known who you really were for a few years, when I just wanted to get away from my parents, way before I knew any of this. And even though I'm glad the strange man stopped the exorcism last night, I don't want to get married not to anyone, but especially not to whatever he is. But it seems like that choice was made for me even before I was born, and as long as I have this mark, he'll be able to find me." She said matter-of-factly, almost detached from the horrific reality she found herself in through no fault of her own. "I don't know if his mark goes deeper than the skin, but please just check, and if it does, please just kill me." Immediately after the consultation, I asked her to relax on the table. She fell into a deep sleep a few seconds after drinking the green liquid I offered. I was anxious as I peeled the skin from her face, but thankfully, I found nothing unusual. No trace of evil resided within the poor little girl. She seemed almost surprised when she awoke afterwards, as if she had thought her situation hopeless. I avoided blindfolding her, not wanting to add to her stress, but still led her to the mirror by hand as she was quite dizzy. "Oh my," she said simply as she caught her first glimpse of her new self in the mirror. "My new red hair, the freckled skin, I love this dress and the necklace too." "Glad you like it," I replied, my cheerful tone diminishing as I pointed to her face where a large heart-shaped birthmark spread across her left cheek, the color of deep wine. "Your options were limited. This is, in a truly ironic way, the most fitting one for you." "I'm sorry, are you kidding?" she exclaimed, jumping towards the mirror for a closer look. "I love it." I often think of this fitting to remind myself that not all my clients leave the shop in a state of collapse or anger. In fact, not all my clients leave the shop, at least not this time. She goes by a different name now, Ren, and her jewelry collection is displayed in the cabinet under the counter where I'm typing these lines as she takes a nap in the upstairs room. She is thriving under my care, happily pursuing the life she desires, a life she can choose for herself. Ren is a constant reminder that I can do good in this world. Hello everyone. I hope you've been well this past week. I was truly surprised and delighted by all the kind comments about Ren's story last time. My heart was warmed knowing you understood how much I cared for the little girl. And more than that you finally saw that my fittings can be done with good intentions. While I dispense forms with the purpose of justice when necessary, many of my custom fittings are truly done to improve the lives of my clients. If I didn't, I would be going against the very tradition that gave me a comfortable new identity in my time of need. Now I will fulfill a request by telling you about another client I had about a year ago. I won't specify what the request was. That wouldn't be any fun, would it? So you'll just have to listen and see. This client walked into my shop about a year ago. The chime of my bell drew my attention to him, as the shop was empty at the time. He was a man nearing 30, very plain-looking, just a standard guy of average height with short dark hair and no distinguishing marks or features. Dressed simply in jeans and a t-shirt. Immediately, I found myself hoping he was there for a custom fitting. I craved his style of appearance the most. You know the type, so unremarkable it's almost unnoticeable in a crowd. The kind of guy you could walk past 20, 30, 100 times without ever noticing. The kind of guy who blends in without trying. These are the kinds of forms I am constantly seeking to give to future clients. So imagine my excitement when he approached the counter and uttered the passphrase for a custom fitting. I closed the shop, then urged him into the back room to begin the consultation. After I laid out the terms of the fitting process, he agreed without hesitation. "All right, tell me about yourself. Why are you here today?" I began, clicking open my pen and settling my notepad in my lap, crossing my legs. He pressed his lips into a thin line, as if reluctant to explain his situation. There was a certain detachment and apathy in his demeanor that immediately put me on guard, but I just continued to stare at him, blinking, until he finally began to speak. "Well, I know this isn't going to make me sound like the best person in the world," he cautioned, rolling his eyes ever so slightly in a way that seemed beyond his own awareness. "But I need you to know that I'm not a bad guy." Nodding, I jotted down a note to reassure him that I was considering this preemptive statement. Though I rarely encountered a good guy who had to declare he wasn't a bad guy, I found myself grateful for the knife I kept tucked in my skirt pocket. There was something off about him. "Don't worry, you're not the first to sit in that chair for unfortunate reasons. Go ahead." Okay," he replied simply, though he seemed to relax a bit at the knowledge that he wasn't the first of his kind to drop by. "My girlfriend was found murdered a few weeks ago. We had our ups and downs, like any normal couple, but overall we were good. At first, everything was sweet as pie, as they say, but a few months in, I started to feel her pulling away from me. I made perfectly reasonable requests, like not wearing a certain dress out or avoiding seeing her male friends alone, and she just blatantly ignored everything I said. The insipid young man sighed heavily, frustration evident, taking a moment to compose himself before he was ready to continue. I was just trying to keep her safe, keep her happy with me, but she seemed like she was about to leave me. So I did what any reasonable man would do when the love of his life might leave at any moment. I tried to regain control of the situation. "Oh, and how did you do that?" I asked, my customer service smile still plastered on my face to hide my growing apprehension. Shrugging, he replied, "I explained to her the real reasons behind my requests, but that didn't work. She was always too emotional, always failed to see the logic I had clearly laid out, that the men in her life were just waiting for a chance to snatch her away. When it became clear that there was no getting through to her, I turned to the internet for suggestions, where I stumbled across a website that promised to give me the tools to keep a woman in my life. There was a magical element to it all, which I was skeptical of, but it was coupled with concrete actions that made the site seem legitimate. First, I had to make a kind of, well, I guess love potion is the best word for it, made from some herbs and a few drops of my blood. I concocted it quickly and cooked her favorite dinner, then threw the mixture into her portion. We had had a fight that morning, and I swear as soon as she walked in and just smelled that potion, she was overflowing with love for me, telling me how much it meant that I took the time to cook for her, he explained, chuckling through a wide smile. There was no longer any clear unique feature to his teeth. I made a mental note of that. So it worked. His expression returned to its baseline of cold, neutral apathy. Almost too well. Over the next few months, she started losing things. She misplaced her phone, keys, purse, computer. I could always find them, reassuring her that whatever she lost was exactly where she last used it. She struggled with that a lot. She seemed on the verge of a breakdown at any moment, relying on me to keep her grounded. Before long, she started complaining about all the anonymous messages she was receiving online. She was being stalked and harassed. She received awful, demeaning texts at all hours. She even had to run home a few times after being followed by strange men. I was busy taking notes, trying to suppress a shiver at the thought of being pursued in the dark by some stranger as I walked home late at night. She was in a state of constant paranoia. She couldn't tell if she was being watched, if there were ghosts in our house. She needed me and she loved me, he declared. Looking down into his lap, he began rubbing his palms together nervously as he continued. That is, until she found out. She found out what? I urged. The man scoffed. She thought she was losing her mind, so she started researching what was happening to her. I guess she found a group of people online who had similar experiences, only to discover their partners were gaslighting them, he replied, raising his hands to make air quotes before letting them fall to his knees. I had installed software on her computer, forwarding her activity to my machine, so I knew everything. And apparently, she had privately spoken to one of her friends to come and get her away from me. Now listen, I loved her, and I wasn't going to lose her. I confronted her with the evidence of her betrayal, and she just lost it with me. Even when I conceded and admitted that I was the one moving her things, that I had plugged her phone number into the website to send those messages, that I had been following her, she couldn't see that I was protecting her. There are real men out there who would hurt her if given the chance. I was just showing her that it was a possibility, he prattled on, shaking his head in disbelief as he ran his fingertips over his furrowed brow. The website specifically said that if my girlfriend found out about the potion or any of it, the magic would be broken and she would never love me again. I interjected, tapping the end of my pen against my temple, a nervous habit of mine. That must have been very hard for you to accept. Nodded vigorously. Yes, it was. I kind of blacked out, I guess. When I came to, she was in bed, no longer breathing. In a panic, I deleted all mention of the so-called gaslighting from all our devices, fabricating evidence that would lead to suspicion of the friend who was coming to rescue her, he sneered. And then I left, creating a pretty good alibi for myself and waiting for him to find her. Don't get me wrong, I know it wasn't right to frame him, but he was obsessed with her. He probably would have hurt her if left alone with her. She just wouldn't listen. I have connections with the police department who steered the investigation to focus on him. I mean, it wouldn't be right for me to go to jail. I have a future. I'm smart at the top of my field and she pushed me to do what I did, he insisted, clenching one hand into a fist. And he's a loser. He used her trust to sweet-talk her away from me. He'd had run-ins with the law before, so of course, he was a good suspect. But he ran before they dug up enough evidence to arrest him, and I believe he's out for revenge on me. I can't live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, always worried that he's one step behind me. I have to go into hiding, and I need a new identity to do that properly. I need your help. After finishing my last notes, I clicked my pen shut. I have exactly what you need. Although initially a bit apprehensive about drinking the sedative liquid, he did so and fell unconscious just a few minutes later for the official fitting. I gave him a little extra just in case, to keep him still. Choosing the form was quick and easy. I knew exactly what I would dress him in from early on. With the extra time this bought, I called Ren in to assist with the fitting. Whenever I'm no longer able to continue here, I hope she will take over the entire operation. However, I sent her upstairs before he woke up, as I didn't think she was ready to participate in the reveal. I led the now blindfolded man by the hand to the mirror to show him his new form. What? No, not this, he roared as soon as he caught sight of the form I had chosen. A man of similar age with scraggly brown curly hair and black eyes. His new skinny, lanky body was dressed in a patterned black t-shirt and dark jeans. Change it. Sighing, I shook my head to show that my decision was final. This man came to me just a week ago. He told me the story of his friend, whom he had agreed to help escape an abusive relationship. How devastated he was to find her murdered. Worse, the police blamed the whole thing on him. I think you know him well. This is the man you so easily threw under the bus. The man you insisted was a loser, simply because he grew up poor and needed to steal food as a teenager. because he sold a little weed here and there to get by. The man staggered towards me, clearly intending to harm me in some way. My instincts reached for the knife in my skirt pocket, but the lingering effects of the sedative had left him weak and disoriented. I think it must have been rather demeaning for him to not be the one in power for once. I'm willing to bet your amateur attempt at witchcraft did nothing. Your deceased girlfriend was probably just happy to see you make an effort, I sneered, grinding my teeth. You broke her trust in herself. I can only imagine the terror she lived through every day as she believed she was losing her mind. Taking a deep breath, I added, and then you killed her, taking her out of this world and away from the friend who truly loved her. And not even in the way you think, he's gay. He begged me on his hands and knees to believe he was innocent. And I did, because he demonstrated genuine grief and empathy, something I don't think you possess one bit. This is a form you don't deserve to wear, but it's the form you need. Now get out of my sight before I do something I might regret. Stunned, he stumbled out of the room and into the front of the shop. I had unlocked the front door, so he let himself out. Peeking from behind the curtain that shielded the entrance to the back room, I watched as a few police officers surrounded him. Wren had made an anonymous report after we finished stitching him up. He insisted it was a mistake, but he was arrested and taken away. He brought this upon himself, and now he would face the consequences. I have many forms in my collection that are too notorious to dress future clients in. However, this was one time I used one of them for a purpose. The man he had framed eagerly agreed to the repurposing of his form in this way. Now he could truly live free, knowing that the man who murdered his best friend would spend the rest of his life paying for what he had done to her, and for the responsibility he tried to escape. Hello and welcome back, my friends, to Fran Hart's fabulous Frocks and happy Haberdashery. I hope you've had a wonderful few weeks since we last met. I've missed you dearly. Wren and I have been hard at work rolling out some new summer styles. The shop floor is already bursting with bright colors and floral prints, linens and chambray, sundresses and chinos. And Wren just finished the cutest tropical fish cufflinks. Now, I have an incredibly poignant story already written and ready to share with you, but I've been asked to keep it under wraps for now. So don't be surprised if you hear about me elsewhere in the near future. That's okay, my friends, because I have a story for you today. I admit I might not come across as subtly as I always try to, but I can only hope you'll understand me and my reasons. Wren was dusting and reorganizing the jewelry display yesterday when a client triggered the front door chime. I opened my mouth to shoo her away. The sign had already been flipped to, "Oh, we're closed," but I guess I'd forgotten to lock the damn door. However, I stopped dead in my tracks the moment I caught sight of the woman entering the shop. A chill ran down my spine as she paused before a white sundress. Square neckline, eyelet lace, knee-length, with decorative buttons down the front. Very cute, but I digress. After she indifferently regarded the dress, she made her way to the counter, appearing a bit disheveled and anxious. The woman was around my own age, mid-30s, and had her mousy brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail. A fixed tiredness was etched on her face. Her weariness was reflected in her choice of attire: yoga pants and an oversized t-shirt advertising a school fundraiser that she had probably chaired. Despite her seemingly harmless appearance, something I couldn't quite articulate then told me this was a dangerous person, one whose story would send chills down anyone's spine. I waved a hand, signaling Wren upstairs. Although by now Wren has attended a few consultations, even asking some insightful questions of her own, and almost all the fittings, I didn't want her exposed to the absolute worst just yet. "Are you?" she mumbled softly as Wren left the shop, locking the door behind her. "Are you FH?" "Well, who's asking?" I replied, smiling as I added, "How can I help you, my dear?" I'm interested in the custom fitting service," she requested secretively, her voice a whisper despite the complete absence of customers, those who had paid attention to the sign on the door. "Of course," I responded, pulling back the black curtain and leading her through to the back room. We both settled into our seats, and I clearly explained the terms of the transaction to her. Once she agreed, I settled into my chair, notepad in my lap, ready to begin the consultation. "All right, my dear, let's begin. What brings you here today?" The woman sighed heavily, looking up as if peering into her own mind for the right words. "Well, I recently lost my son," she began, her large blue eyes already welling with tears. She sniffled loudly. I got pregnant quite young. I gave birth when I was 20. His father didn't stick around, so it was always just the two of us. I'm so sorry for your loss, I offered solemnly. I couldn't imagine losing Wren, and I'd only cared for her for a few years. If you don't mind me asking, what happened? She glanced nervously back and forth before whispering, there's, something wrong with my house. Raising an eyebrow, I asked simply, oh. Yes, I received the house as a gift from my parents when my son was about 5 or 6 years old. It wasn't big or fancy, but they were tired of seeing us in our tiny apartment, she explained before bowing her head. But if I had known what that house held for us, for him, I never would have accepted. From the moment we moved in, I knew it was haunted. I shivered at the thought. There are a few things in the world that Fran Hart truly fears, and that is certainly one of them. What kind of spirit were you dealing with? Pulling the elastic band from her hair, she let her curly locks fall to her shoulders before gathering them to retie her ponytail, smiling nervously. Usually, I'd wake up startled in the middle of the night to the sound of soft footsteps wandering the hall. The first few times I was too scared to check. However, worried about my son, I eventually had to confront the strange intruder. And well, it was a little girl. Oh. At first I thought it might be one of my son's school friends, Annalise. The little girl had a dress quite similar to the ghost girl's dress, but her hair was different and she just wandered around as if it were her own home. I guess maybe it was her home in a past life. However, as soon as she recognized my presence, she'd bolt, disappearing into the night. Nodding, I interjected. As ghosts often do, I count myself lucky to not have experienced a horrific encounter. I swear I'd jump out of my skin. Though fearful of whatever would come next, I urged her to continue. The little girl stopped appearing for a while after that. I thought I was rid of her for good. However, a few months later, I woke up again to those tiny footsteps. It was still the little girl, she explained, tightening her ponytail. I mentioned it to my son, not wanting to scare him. I asked if he was secretly bringing any little girlfriends home for sleepovers. He denied it, of course. He was a good kid. But he never saw the little girl. He was always fast asleep. I realized I had been so scared that I had barely taken any notes. I took her brief silence as an opportunity to catch up. Did the little girl ever go away? Shaking her head back and forth, she pressed her lips into a thin line. Never completely, but there were periods when she'd leave us alone, and other times she'd appear more frequently. I honestly started ignoring her. She seemed harmless. Maybe she was just confused. However, I realize now that my supervision of her was the only thing keeping her from latching onto my son. How so? I asked with a sorrowful frown. Tears welled in her eyes as she untied and retied her hair again, likely a nervous habit. My son started to change. As a teenager, he was moody, he slept all day, lost interest in church completely. He'd often snap at me, yelling nonsensical things, then it would be like a switch flipped, and he'd sob uncontrollably about something inside him that he couldn't find the words to explain. I told him he could tell me anything, but he insisted I wouldn't understand. Many would consider this normal teenage angst, but it was more than that. I started to suspect the little girl's spirit was influencing him, though such a thought was blasphemous. So the next time I was woken by footsteps, I snuck out of my room and into the hall. To my horror, all my suspicions were confirmed. A lump formed in my throat, and my palms began to sweat. I tried to busy myself with frantic note-taking, but the pen slipped in my hand. My son, my beautiful son, she wailed as tears began to stream down her face. He had been completely taken over by the spirit. I didn't see a little girl aimlessly wandering the hall. I saw my son in a dress, wearing a cheap wig. He froze the moment he caught sight of me. I rushed forward and tried to cast out the ghost. I was scared of the ghost, but I was more afraid of losing my son. Afraid of my son becoming whatever I saw that night. I grabbed him by the arms and held him still as I ranted at him, talking about the sacrilege of a man dressing as a woman, about defying God by refusing the body he had given him. A moment of lucidity came over him, and I took it to mean it worked because he just said, "I'm sorry, Mom," and stumbled back into his room. My heart somehow both sank and pounded rapidly, fearful of what would come next. The woman pulled a tissue from the box on the table, dabbing gently under her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. I woke up feeling refreshed. I thought my son would be back to normal because the ghost had released him. I knocked on his door to wake him and received no response. Usually I'd hear a tired groan or an angry, "Leave me alone, Mom," but there was nothing. Worried, I pushed open his bedroom door, and he wasn't in bed. No, he was in the closet, still in the women's clothes, and he was dead. She exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief, her gaze vacant and detached. He left a letter, an apology for lying to me all those years. He said there was never a ghost girl, that it was always him being his true self, that he had tried to ask for help, but I never listened, that he couldn't tell me exactly what was going on, for fear of how I would react. And now his worst fears had been confirmed. He couldn't see himself going on, and this is why I came to you today. Because I lost my son, not only when he died, but many, many years before when he chose to defy God. Rumors started to spread, and I could just feel all the other mothers whispering behind my back. I need to start over. I need a new identity. Please, Fran, please help me. I clicked my pen shut and folded my arms in my lap. And that's all, my dear? She nodded in silent acceptance. I have just the thing. I retrieved a form that had been tucked away in the deepest corner of the closet for nearly 2 decades, a form I thought I would never dispense again. The process went smoothly, and I pulled the blindfold over her eyes the moment she was refitted. When she awoke, I led her to the mirror for the big reveal. As the blindfold fell to the floor, she gasped in horror at her new form, what appeared to be an 18-year-old boy. Although the previous owner was quite tall, I had to admit the skin was a bit small for her. The stitches had not fully closed on her chest and hips, gaping and bulging disgustingly to reveal deeper layers. Dark dermis with networks of nerves and blood vessels, subcutaneous pockets containing greasy yellow fat cells. Though initially too stunned to utter a word, she finally opened her mouth to begin. "No," I roared, clapping a hand tightly over her mouth. "You do not get to say that name." I inhaled sharply to steady my nerves, straightening up before her so I could look directly into her frantic eyes. "Now it's my turn to tell you a story," I declared, blinking rapidly to fight back the tears I feared would fall. "I don't believe you'll listen, so I'm keeping my hand right there. I want you to imagine that you've never felt comfortable in your own body. I want you to take the pain and suffering you may feel right now, and I want you to imagine feeling that way your entire life. That's how I lived, how your daughter lived." My voice began to tremble as I added, "I lived in confusion and fear, thinking there must be something wrong with me, simply because who I was on the inside didn't match the outside. I fought it for a long time, though I was always feminine. I was even bullied for it relentlessly, especially by you, Chloe." A flicker of recognition flashed in her eyes as she realized whose skin she was wearing once belonged to me. She tried to fight back. I admit I was scared then, scared of my tormentor. Thankfully, she was still dazed from the sedative and only succeeded in staggering. I grabbed one of her arms to keep her upright. My senior year of high school, I decided I wanted to be a seamstress. Knowing this would only exacerbate the teasing, I kept it a secret. I learned everything I knew about sewing and design from the previous owner of this shop. I explained, a deep sense of nostalgia piercing my gut as I recalled Madame Mercy Abbott, the eccentric yet kind and gentle woman who took me under her wing. I was almost out of high school, surviving broken inside, but surviving when you followed me here after school one day, and then the next day, you brought your cronies to ambush me in an alley and beat me so severely I almost lost my life just as it was about to truly begin. My breath became shallow and unsatisfying as I fearfully recounted the attack I had faced, shaking my head at her baseless hatred. I was lucky enough to survive by dragging myself on my hands and knees the rest of the way. I collapsed behind the shop where Madame Mercy found me. Only then did I understand what the back room of the shop contained, the nature of her custom fittings. She repaired me with her tools, then put me to sleep without explanation. I trusted her because she was the only one I could trust. I woke up in this beautiful, wonderful new form. To this day, I still look at my form with gratitude. I admire my fuller figure, the curves of my waist, stomach, legs, breasts. I cherish my thick dark hair, my heart-shaped face, my plump lips, my bright emerald eyes, even the small gap between my 2 front teeth. I didn't even have to tell her who I was on the inside. She just knew, I exhaled. She knew my secret. The secret I only whispered to myself as I gathered enough courage to try my mother's lipstick to slip into her high heels. The secret I whispered to myself as I saw my true self begin to emerge in my reflection. The secret I whispered to myself first with shame, then with an overwhelming joy as I introduced me to myself for the first time. Fran, after all these years, I've learned that appearances are only skin deep. I recalled Madame Mercy whispering as she unveiled my new form with pride. I've learned to look deeper, to see people as they are on the inside, and on the inside, you are just like me. My voice began to tremble as I added, I was always Fran. I was never the boy you mocked, and you never had a son. You had a daughter, the only thing in that house that was the idea of a son that you refused to let go of. I only wish I could have gotten to her before you did. I released my hand from her mouth, letting my arm hang loosely at my side. Don't you see, Chloe? Now you're in the wrong body. Do you even know who you are? God help you. God help me, she wailed, looking past my shoulder at her reflection. God help me that my son would become a pervert like you. That was all I needed to hear. I withdrew the knife from my skirt pocket and plunged it into the side of her neck, cutting off her words before that last, horrific word escaped her lips. As I released her arm, she fell backward onto the floor, bleeding to death. I realize many of you may react negatively to me or to what I have done now. And I accept that. As painful as it may be, I'm used to being questioned on the very basis of who I am. All that matters now is that I know myself. Even before Madame Mercy refitted me, I knew and loved Fran because I always was and always will be her. And listen, I don't advocate murder, but she nearly took my life in many ways. Certainly, she left me for dead that day. But primarily, her continuous denial of my personhood could have ended my life many years ago, and tragically, it took her daughter's life. It was a hasty decision to kill Chloe, so I hope you understand why I need to lay low for a while. I may return somewhere in the future, but for now, I'm going into hiding. Hope to see you all soon, my friends. If you're ever in town, be sure to visit me at Fran Hart's fabulous Frocks and Happy Haberdashery, the little shop where you don't necessarily get what you want, but you always get what you need. And sometimes, just sometimes, you get what you deserve. Fear Healing Support Group. The first participant was deathly afraid of clocks. From my earliest memory, I have lived in fear. In fact, fear isn't enough to describe how I feel. Fear is normal, even good. Fear keeps us safe, prevents us from making foolish decisions that we would surely make without it. Fear helped humankind evolve, evolving with us, keeping us alive. I fear spiders, I fear snakes, I fear falling from towering bridges, things and situations that truly pose a threat to life. But my phobia is completely irrational, and it plunges me into ultimate dread. So much so that just thinking about it makes my mouth dry, my palms sweaty, my heart race. So much so that just seeing it triggers an immediate anxiety attack, choking me, my stomach cramping so badly that I vomit everything, so much so that when forced to confront it. Well, I'll tell you about that later, because it's not my turn to share yet. For years, I have been controlled by my phobia. Despite my best efforts to avoid it, I am triggered by something that sounds so harmless, I never know when it will strike. The phobia tightens its grip on me, terrorizes me, controls me. Above all, I am exhausted by it, so much so that I finally signed up for an intensive workshop that promised to provide tools to heal my fear, led by someone who had truly overcome their own fear. I figured, having tried medication and therapy, there was no harm in trying this too. And then I found myself in a room that resembled a Sunday school classroom in an abandoned church. The space was empty save for a circle of 8 chairs arranged on the scuffed white linoleum floor. A single line on the whiteboard was the only sign I had arrived at the right place. Welcome to my workshop. I will be in shortly, but it is important for the process that you do not know who I am at the outset. I am a firm believer in the healing power of discussing the origin of your fear and how it has changed your life. First, we will all share our stories as equals. Then I will show you how I reclaimed control of my life. Please choose a seat and find the slip of paper taped to the underside. We will share in that order. I randomly chose a seat, slightly disappointed. It was difficult for me to pinpoint a specific starting point for my phobia. It had always been there from the very beginning. However, it had altered the course of my life, had led me to do things that now, with each miserable day that passes, I regret, so I decided to stay. I reached under the chair for the slip of paper, peeled it from the bottom of the seat, and read the number. The other participants filtered in afterwards. First was Tegan, a strikingly gaunt young woman with deeply hollowed cheeks. As soon as she sat down, she pulled a travel ashtray from her purse and began smoking, and she never stopped. Next was Alex, a handsome man in a conventional, almost unremarkable way, probably around 40. He nodded a greeting to us, then sat 3 seats to my right, pushing his thick-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose. Val, a man so tall he could eclipse the sun, with a shaved head and a clean-shaven face, looking very dapper. He nervously asked Tegan to read his number for him as he settled onto the flimsy chair beside her. Eddy, an elderly woman probably nearing 90, chose the seat next to me, with her permed gray hair and large pearl necklace around her neck. She looked so much like my own grandmother that I immediately felt more comfortable with her there. Thomasine was probably the youngest of us, chuckling as she settled into the seat next to Alex. Her hair was dyed golden blonde, but her dark roots had grown out at least 4 inches, and she wore a full, though unevenly applied, face of makeup. John, a middle-aged man with thinning reddish-gray hair, walked in with squeaking white tennis shoes. His beer belly was even more evident as he sat down immediately to my left. "Oh," he spoke up immediately. "What happened to your hand?" I used one hand to pull the sleeve of my moss-green sweater down to cover the stump at my left wrist. Finally, Cecily entered the room, an incredibly alluring woman with short black hair, glowing tan skin, and an elaborately decorated eye patch over her right eye. She stepped towards the circle, slightly off-kilter, placing her palm on the seat before sitting down directly opposite me. She tore the slip of paper from the underside of her chair. "All right then," she said, turning the open slip to reveal the number 1. "It looks like I'm first up, so I guess I'll just start." The group offered no response. If the facilitator was among us, they gave no sign either. "My name is Cecily and, I have chronometrophobia," she began, her voice clear and confident. Noticing the blank looks on my face and the rest of the listeners, she quickly added, "the fear of clocks." John, the man immediately to my left, snorted through his nose. "Clocks, huh?" Cecily shot a sharp glare in his direction. "Yes, you ass, clocks. Anything else you want to say?" she retorted. He shook his head with an indolent air while gently encouraging. "Go on, child." "Thank you, Eddy," she replied warmly, her tone in complete contrast to the moment before. Eddy returned a sweet smile. "It all started with black spots," she continued, her leather jacket rustling as she settled back into her chair. "Tiny black spots in my vision, little threads suspended everywhere I looked. At first, they were barely noticeable. I could only see them when I looked at a white wall, but they quickly became more obstructive. I made a mental note to call the doctor, but I had bills to pay, so I put it off, thinking maybe I was just irritating my eyes from my contact lenses or something. The black spots only appeared in my right eye." She pointed to her right eye, or rather, the patch she wore to conceal it. The patch was studded with black and white gems, with a few delicate chains dangling. It was strange yet beautiful. I could almost overlook it. "I just continued with business as usual," she sighed, leaning back in her chair and stretching her legs forward. "But a few weeks after the first black spots appeared, things got much worse. I was out to lunch with my dad, joking around as usual, when suddenly, I don't even know how to explain it. It was like a dark curtain fell over the right side of my world. Nearly half of my right eye's vision just vanished, blacking out, erased." The unevenly made-up girl, Thomasine, gasped, "What happened?" "My dad rushed me to the doctor, and they told me I had something called a detached retina," she replied, turning to her left to speak directly to the girl. "Basically, a part of my retina, the thin layer lining the back of my eyeball, had peeled away like old wallpaper. Without it, my brain couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, so it simply blacked out that area as if it didn't exist. I needed immediate medical attention, or I'd almost certainly be permanently blind." Cecily rubbed the short, curly black hair on her head with one hand as she continued. "I went in for treatment the next day. They numbed me, then inserted a small metal instrument to prop open my eye while injecting a small gas bubble inside. While the procedure itself was quite quick and simple, though horrifying, the real issue was the recovery process. To ensure the gas bubble would stay in place and push the retina back into place, I had to lie face down, my head tilted slightly, for at least a week." "A whole week?" I interrupted incredulously. "Yes," she confirmed, nodding slowly, pressing her lips together at the end of the word. "I could get up briefly to eat or use the restroom, but essentially that was it." Tegan flicked her cigarette ash into the plastic ashtray, then took a long drag. "Good grief," she exhaled, a plume of smoke escaping with the syllable. Her oversized sweater slipped down one shoulder, clearly revealing her deeply hollowed collarbone. My dad was a lifesaver, insisting I come stay at his house during my recovery. We were very close, especially after my mom left, Cecily revealed, a hint of sadness in her voice. The first day was awful, my body was stiff, and oh my goodness, the boredom was truly unimaginable. My dad was with me as much as he could be, but still, you just can't know. The second day was unbearable. But the third day was pure hell. Some of the group members, myself included, leaned forward, our curiosity almost palpable. Rubbing her palms repeatedly over her tight jeans, she seemed slightly anxious for the first time since entering. My dad settled me in for bed that evening. I drifted off to sleep. I woke up the next morning, at least, I think it was morning. I had blackout curtains in my childhood bedroom, the room I was in, so I couldn't be sure. My phone was charging on the other side of the room. I lay there for a long time, either waiting to fall back asleep or waiting for my dad to come in. But he didn't, and I certainly couldn't fall asleep because of the ticking. A sudden silence fell over the room as Cecily looked down at her lap, fiddling with her fingernails. No one urged her to continue. I knew we all knew what she was battling, the anxiety, the nausea, the sheer, crushing dread that surfaced at just the thought of your deepest fear. The clock in my room, one of those loud old clocks, she stammered, gritting her teeth. Unable to see anything in the darkness and the rest of the house completely silent, that incessant ticking, it was all I could focus on. Over and over, tick-tock, she murmured nervously, illustrating the phrase by tapping her heel rhythmically on the floor several times, then stopping abruptly, her eyes wide. She took a moment to compose herself and a shaky, deep breath. As the hours passed, it got louder and louder. I called for my dad, but there was no response. I thought it must be the middle of the night, so I desperately tried to force myself to fall back asleep. But the ticking, that damn ticking, was taunting me. I lay there for what felt like hours, days, even years, paralyzed by the sound. It sounds irrational, stupid to admit, but I couldn't move because of a clock. Even when I had to use the restroom, I couldn't get up. There was something about the ticking that terrified me in a way I had never experienced, freezing me in place. At some point, I noticed the sound began to take on a different quality. Like there was another layer of sound emerging. The tick-tock rhythm began to sound like clop, 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 and it was coming from above me, in perfect rhythm with the ticking from the clock in the room, as if someone was stomping around in the room above. But it didn't sound like human footsteps. The sound was too harsh, too distinct, not softly muted like a human's. Trembling visibly, she recalled, "Oh my God, I just remember lying there, so scared and confused, and thinking to myself that it almost sounded like hooves." And then the sound began to move again, still overhead but a little further away, a little softer. I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But that feeling didn't last, because just a few seconds later, the sound returned, louder than ever as the tick-tock, clop-clop rhythm echoed deafeningly throughout the house. That's when I realized that whatever was making the noise, it was coming down the stairs. "Oh my God, no," Eddy gasped, placing a slender hand over the lower half of her face. I just lay there in the bed I had soiled, my body drenched in cold sweat, petrified and helpless, unable to see anything, unable to hear anything but the clop-clop, clop-clop coming down the stairs, each step closer to me punctuated by that horrific sound, she said breathlessly, her hands clenching into fists, thudding rhythmically on her thighs. It pounded through the first floor of the house, relentless in its pursuit, until finally it reached my room. The door was ajar, letting in a sliver of light, but I remained still in bed, face down, as the sound continued to grow louder, closer with each step, until I swear it was emanating from inside me, tearing at my eardrums like thunder, vibrating inside my ears, inside my mind. I knew the monster was beside me then, because I could feel its breath on my shoulder, so hot it almost vaporized. All 7 of us were hanging on her every word. The room was completely silent save for the click of Tegan's lighter as she lit another cigarette. Cecily squeezed her eyes shut, still seeing as if trying to banish the image of the monster from her mind. I slowly turned my head, and in the faint light from the doorway, I saw the lower half of the monster standing on 2 thick legs, covered in thick black fur. It repeatedly bent one of its legs to stomp a cloven hoof onto the floor in perfect rhythm with the clock. Tick-tock, clop-clop. In that moment, I didn't care if I lived or died, as long as death brought an end to that sound. I rolled out of bed, away from the monster, and ran like hell on my numb legs. The beast growled as it began to chase me. I could hear the clop-clop-clop pursuing me in the darkness. Somehow I escaped, and I burst through the door into the blinding light of day, burning my damaged retina. And then the sound stopped. Just like that, she revealed with a snap of her fingers. Still terrified, I ran upstairs to my dad's room and I found him there, dead on the floor. Some of us gasped in response. Thomasine reached across, placing her hand on Cecily's hand in comfort. He had a stroke and fell, unable to call for help. Tears suddenly streamed from her eyes as her lower lip trembled. The worst part is, it could have been a slow death. He could have been lying there for hours. She speculated, her voice shaky as she tried to continue. She sniffled loudly. I developed a phobia of clocks after that. I lost my vision completely in my right eye because I was too scared to go to the doctor, worried I might see a clock. She flipped up her eye patch to reveal a pale, milky open eye, in stark contrast to her warm brown left eye. My retina fully detached. I developed cataracts after the surgery. I don't mind it myself, but I cover it because I got tired of people staring when I finally worked up the courage to leave the house. I want them to look at something I control, she explained as she placed the eye patch back in its original position. To this day, I can't bear to look at a clock. But more than that, I can't bear to hear one. The ticking of a clock in my hand is still as loud as it was that day in the dark, 3 years ago. Along with the sound is the memory of that awful monster, and I feel it chasing me every time I hear it, she said flatly, her hands resting on her lap as she finished her story. And worse, the ticking of the clock carries with it the cruel reminder of every second that passed while my dad lay dying on the floor. Every second I could have helped him, every second I could have saved his life. I think that's what frightens me the most. Oh, damn, Tegan finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence after Cecily finished her story. She used the ash of her cigarette to light a fresh one, her bony knees knocking together as she crossed her legs. Glad I don't have to go after her. Cecily offered a faint smile, her laughter holding both deep sadness and revealing gratitude for a momentary reprieve from the tension. Thank you for sharing, Cecily, Val, the giant man, said warmly, his unexpectedly deep, resonant voice echoing. She just nodded in response, though her tears had begun to subside, and a reluctant half-smile played on her face. Who's next? I asked carefully, worried about the possibility of hearing another horrifying story, but also impatient for the group to continue. I longed for a little release, a sense of control over my own life, and clearly I would have to wait until all 8 of us had shared to get it. The young woman to my left, Thomasine, probably in her early 20s, opened her clenched fist to reveal a small, crumpled ball of paper. She unrolled it with her overly long acrylic fingernails to show the group the number 2. I guess it's my turn, she spoke softly, letting the crinkled slip of paper fall onto her lap. I'm Thomasine. I offered a comforting smile to the youngest participant, though the gesture also served to reassure me. Take your time, child, we're here to support you. Thomasine exhaled dramatically as she settled into a more comfortable position, rotating her neck and rubbing a shoulder while wincing in pain. You can probably tell just by looking at me, she began, gesturing to her hair and makeup. I have cataptrophobia, the fear of mirrors. Her disheveled appearance suddenly made much more sense with this information. The mottled foundation, the uneven winged eyeliner. Her messy hair, riddled with split ends, the few inches of dark natural hair growing out in stark contrast to the bleached blonde. A wave of guilt washed over me as I realized I had judged her appearance, completely unaware of the impact of her phobia on her. I always wanted to be a beautiful girl, she sighed, shaking her head languidly. As a kid, I wanted to be a princess, I wanted to be a model, I wanted to be a damn Barbie doll. But I was born with darkness, with ugliness. I always hated looking in the mirror, but as I got older, I just stared. I just look at myself and dissect every single point. Flat chest, mousy hair, dark, not blonde, big, crooked nose. Ugly, ugly, ugly girl, she taunted, her mocking tone sending shivers down my spine. She repeatedly jabbed a finger in the air in front of her, as if confronting her reflection at this very moment. Cecily interrupted. You are a beautiful girl, Thomasine. Thomasine turned to her right to look at her, interrupting sharply. No, I'm not, but my older sister, now she was beautiful. Tall, long legs, bright blonde hair, perfect body. She didn't need to wish she was Barbie. She was Barbie. Not only perfect on the outside, she was also gentle and kind. I loved her so much. She was my idol. I wanted to be just like her. So when she committed suicide, I fell apart. I didn't know who else to look up to. What worried me even more was the realization that if she was everything I wanted to be and was still so unhappy, what hope was there for me? She whispered, tears welling and gathering at her lower lash line, clumping with layers of mascara. I'm so sorry for your loss, Thomasine, I offered awkwardly. It was the least I could do. Dabbing gently at the corner of her eye with her tight, long sleeve, she nodded her acceptance of my condolences. Thank you, I was only 14 then, she was a few years older. We shared a room. I was the one who found her, hanging there, lifeless in the closet. I hated myself even more after that. Why did I get to live when she was gone? I started dyeing my hair, painting my face with makeup, trying to imitate her. But I would never be as beautiful. I still hated mirrors, but the phobia only developed years later. It happened when I was 20 in college, doing pretty well with my grades. I even had a boyfriend, a guy who truly loved me for who I was, who thought I was beautiful, she mused, gazing off into the distance. He knew about my self-esteem issues and was very eager to help me. He said, if only you could see yourself through my eyes, Thomasine. And then he suggested an idea. Alex shifted in his seat, the flimsy chair creaking under his weight. What idea? She crossed her legs at the ankles, her tiptoes touching the floor. She was so petite that her feet didn't fully reach the ground. He was really into hallucinogens, like a spiritual thing, I guess. He suggested we drop acid together, that I would truly get to know myself, see myself for what I truly was, not the person I was constantly trying to be but always falling short of. I wasn't so sure, but he insisted, and I trusted him. We took, the drug, and I didn't really feel anything for a while. I only truly realized I was tripping or high or whatever when the patterns on the wall in front of me came alive, just the most mundane geometric lines transforming, moving. They were meaningful in a way I had never experienced, she described, using an outstretched finger to trace invisible patterns in front of her, shapes only she knew. It was beautiful, like the universe was speaking to me. No words needed. I started to get a little anxious when the patterns on the wall just kept moving back and forth, like an endless pendulum as. Thomasine took a long, broken breath, composing herself before continuing. My boyfriend found me on the bed. As he stepped towards me, I could see the tracers from where he had been, where he was going. He put on some music, then lay down beside me and held me. It was the most magical experience of my life, she exhaled, closing her eyes, savoring the beauty of the memory. And then he told me I should go look in the mirror, she stammered, swallowing loudly. He said I would finally see myself the way he saw me, beautiful and perfect, just my essence, no appearance to distract. Again, I nervously tried to tell him about my complicated relationship with mirrors. But again, he insisted, and again, I trusted him. I walked into the bathroom, connected to the world around me with each step my feet took, overjoyed with every single step. I had heard horror stories about seeing your reflection while tripping, so I was quite pleasantly surprised to just see myself in the mirror, nothing strange beyond my pupils pulsating, my facial features slightly more exaggerated, but not horrific to behold, at least not at first. As she paused her story, the subsequent silence felt heavy, suffocating. Tegan's breathy smoke was the only sound piercing the tension. Burying her face in her hands, Thomasine continued. I finally felt beautiful as I looked at myself in that mirror. I smiled, then laughed. I leaned towards the mirror, placing my palms against it. She mimicked the action, both hands outstretched in front. Happy to look myself in the eye for the first time when the eyes of my reflection began to look different, reflective like a cat's eyes in the dark and almost yellow. I watched in utter horror as my reflection detached itself from me, drew one hand back into a fist, and slammed, thumped right into the mirror with the bottom of its fist, smiling maniacally. A huge lump in my throat as I tried to comprehend the horror she had experienced. At that moment, I saw myself. Not myself, but myself. I'm not sure exactly how to explain it. But for the first time, I looked past the appearance into my true self, Thomasine stammered, a clear smear of bright pink lipstick visible on one of her two front teeth. And then she started talking to me, teasing me worse than I had ever done to myself, calling me vapid, useless, ugly. Each word emphasized by a fist slamming down on the other side of the mirror. I noticed a flickering movement overhead. I looked up and I saw something there, moving back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was a pair of feet, suspended in midair, swaying. I was overcome with terror as I realized who. My reflection was telling me I would never be as beautiful as she was, as my sister was, so I whispered poison to her in the dark. Every night, as soon as the lights went out and we lay in bed to sleep, planting seeds of self-loathing into her mind until she. She choked back a sob, her eyes welling with tears again. I tried to scream in protest that it wasn't me, that I would never say those things to my beloved sister, but it only came out as a stutter as I suddenly remembered. I remember my sister crying softly in the dark as wicked and hateful words just slithered out of me in an almost inaudible whisper. "You're nothing. You're useless. Everyone would be better off without you. If you just died." She broke down sobbing, black tears streaming down her face. Thomasine wiped her tears on her sleeve, a significant amount of smeared makeup on the fabric. "I was right about one thing, it wasn't really me," she revealed, her voice trailing off as she stifled a sob. I watched, paralyzed, unable to scream for help, unable to say anything as my reflection opened its fist, withdrew its other hand from the mirror, and began to forcefully tear at its fingernails until the nail bed gave way, and she ripped it upwards with a sickening crack. I flinched, both at the image in my mind and at Thomasine's sudden cry. I felt the pain from her actions, sharp and biting, intense as if it were my own body. Even as I looked down at my trembling hands to confirm my own nails were still intact, she recalled, tightly wrapping her right hand around her left index finger, as if the pain was still there, throbbing and aching. Her tears dried as sorrow was eclipsed by fear, the kind of horror that could only be escaped through complete emotional detachment, her voice now hollow and lifeless. And then my reflection gripped the injured nail, wiggling it frantically until it loosened enough for her to pull it up, tearing it along the back of her finger, peeling it away with a slow, drawn-out movement. The pain was excruciating, but my hand exploded in agony as she used her other hand to completely rip the finger off. Relentlessly, she continued to savagely tear into the hand. The skin finally ripped down to her palm. She dug her finger under the wound triumphantly, burying it deep to the knuckle, then ripped the entire flesh from her hand. Thomasine explained, her eyes squeezed shut. "John just said, 'Bloody hell.'" The sentiment was echoed by the rest of the group, even Eddy, as all 7 of us nodded in agreement with his vulgar assessment of the situation. A grave expression remained on Thomasine's face as she confessed matter-of-factly, "That wasn't even the worst part. What happened after that haunts me to this day." "What happened?" Thomasine Alex asked, his brow furrowed with concern for the girl. After my reflection tore the flesh from the hand, I was expecting to see the inside of a hand. A human hand, but what I saw was much, much worse. Instead, another hand appeared, but it was pale, sickeningly gray, and it was completely covered in scales. She stammered with a clear shiver, placing a hand on her stomach as if to soothe her upset stomach. She slapped the new hand flat against the mirror, the barrier between us thin and fragile. As she locked her glittering, amber eyes on mine to say these words, "You will never be beautiful because I am you, and one day I will be older than you." A stifling silence fell over the room. I stopped my bouncing leg, a nervous habit of mine, unaware I had been performing the repetitive motion. Val buried his face in his massive hands, his bald head gleaming under the overhead lights. Thomasine took a series of rapid, shallow breaths as she prepared to finish her story. I finally felt control over my body again, enough to turn on my heel and run from the bathroom. My boyfriend was incredibly worried about me but tried to reassure me, saying I just had a bad trip, she recounted before letting out a long sigh. At first, I almost believed him, but I was terrified of mirrors. More precisely, of my reflection in them immediately after the event. After I fully sobered up, I went home and stood before the bathroom sink to wash my face. I looked up into the mirror and she was there, my reflection. With the skin of my arm in her teeth, she tore a long strip of flesh away to reveal the horrible scales beneath. I covered the mirror with a towel, but it didn't help. Every time I accidentally caught sight of myself reflected in a mirror, there was less of me, more of her. Every second of every day, I could feel her burrowing out of me. I was in constant pain. Before, I hated looking in the mirror because I hated my appearance. Now I am utterly terrified of mirrors because they show me who I truly am, what my fate will become. I have removed all mirrors from my house, and I won't go into anyone else's house. Even if they promise to cover their mirrors, I still know she's there waiting. Even with the mirrors covered, she shivered, hugging herself for comfort. I still hear her thumping, 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 thumping at the mirrors. The end of Thomasine's harrowing story left my chest tight, my palms covered in a faint sheen of sweat. She had endured such trauma that I was surprised she had even mustered the courage to join the group. Yet, Cecily also had her own share of trauma related to her phobia, and I too certainly had my own. So I could only assume that the remaining 5 participants John to my left, then Val, Tegan, Alex, and back around to my right, Eddy must also have similarly horrifying stories to share. 2 down, 6 to go. The only question that remained was who was next. Cecily voiced the question in my head, a question likely on everyone's mind, everyone except the next in line, number 3. Val, hunched forward with his forearms resting on his thighs and his large hands clasped together, lifted his head to reply, "That would be me, my turn." I glanced at the giant man, who, incredibly, managed to blend into his surroundings despite his imposing appearance, speaking in his deep, resonant, warm voice. The man, probably in his 30s, was easily over 6 feet tall, making the gaunt Tegan to his left and John, a much smaller man to his right, look tiny. He was dressed much more professionally than the rest of us, wearing a crisp white button-down shirt with black dress pants and a perfectly tied tie. "I'm Val," he announced, sitting upright in his chair, making me worry the flimsy seat would collapse under his weight. "I have octophobia. I have a fear of the number 8. "So that's why you had me read your number, huh?" Tegan asked, exhaling a lazy plume of smoke as she turned towards him. She laughed hollowly as she added, "I thought you couldn't read." Val responded with his own humorless laugh, a sudden sadness in his dark eyes. I can assure you I read quite well. Before my phobia, I was studying mathematics in one of the top graduate programs for my field. And now you're afraid of a number?" John asked incredulously. I shot him a quick glare. The taller man gave a loose shrug in response before explaining, "Well, it's not actually the number itself I'm afraid of, but the shape of it. The figure 8. As they say, he extended a long finger to trace the shape, starting at the top, drawing a half circle, then intersecting in the middle, drawing the bottom circle before circling back up to complete the top circle. Finished. I was studying number theory, believe it or not." He mused, dropping his hand to his lap with a soft slap. Number theory deals with the properties and relationships of numbers, especially positive integers meaning whole, non-fractional numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4. He paused to swallow loudly, his throat dry, and so on. I leaned forward, clasping the stump of my left wrist with my right hand, a frown on my face. I can empathize with fearing something so mundane. What happened, Val? He took several deep breaths, in and out, in and out. I wondered how large his lungs must be. "I got too deep into my work, I must admit," he replied, a shy smile briefly flashing, his white teeth prominent against his dark skin. "Growing up, I always loved numbers. Math was my favorite subject. It seemed natural that I would study mathematics in college. I graduated at the top of my class and went on to pursue my PhD with a focus on number theory." Opening that letter, my acceptance letter to this prestigious program, that was the happiest day of my life. Val reminisced, looking down at his trembling hands. His soft, deep voice also trembled, and I thought he might cry at any moment. A few years in, once in my graduate program, my love for numbers, well, it blossomed into something more akin to an obsession. I loved them all, but I revered the number 8 the most. I remember one day I was working on my thesis, and I went to write the number 8. I started to draw it, and I just kept going. Even after I had closed both loops, I redrew it again and again. Val fell silent, seemingly lost in his own tangled thoughts. He shook his head quickly, his sweet smile returning. "Well, you get the idea. I realized that the number 8 represented the infinite nature of the universe. I became completely infatuated with the number, the figure 8. I started seeing it everywhere. In the trail a figure skater left on the ice, the earthworm wriggling on the sidewalk after a rainstorm. Race car drivers circling the track, even the plastic ring around the soda can I drank daily. The figure 8 and the frequency with which I saw it, it became a sign to me. A sign that the beauty of life and love never ends. If only I had known then how wrong I was." As the giant man bowed his head into his massive hands. Thomasine encouraged, "Take it slow, Val, saying it will make it feel better, I promise." Looking up again, he nodded in grim acceptance. I tried to present, my findings to my faculty advisors. Needless to say, they were not impressed. I had spent all my research time delving into the philosophy describing the true meaning of the number 8, the secrets ancient mathematicians were trying to impart, whispered into each stroke and curve of the number. I couldn't accept it when my superiors told me to refocus my research. I didn't stop. I just delved deeper until I stopped completing the required tasks. I was late on assignments, I stopped attending meetings. Eventually, I was kicked out of the program, but I wasn't deterred. At least not then, he exhaled, rubbing his smooth, bald head with a massive hand. I immersed myself in my research. Everywhere I looked, I saw another figure 8. A pair of glasses on a stranger's face, a handwritten S, the trajectory the sun moved across the sky in a year. The strokes in a painting connected to form the sacred shape. Each encounter with the figure 8 brought me closer to infinity, closer to God. He took a shaky breath through pursed lips, loosening his tie as a sheen of sweat appeared on his glittering forehead. I stayed up for days on end. I started drinking alcohol to sleep each night, because every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was the figure 8. I fell into alcoholism rather quickly. I would sit at the local bar from early afternoon until late at night spreading the word of the sacred shape, the figure 8, to anyone who would listen. Not many, I confess, he remarked, snorting through his nose as he recalled his eccentric behavior. One evening, I was at the bar, drinking a cheap beer. I was almost out of money by then, pressing the bottom of the bottle onto the bar in front of me. As I set the bottle down once to the left and immediately to the right, the condensation left behind formed a figure 8. I was tracing my finger incessantly over the shape when a man sat down beside me, wearing a black hooded coat. We talked for quite a while, and eventually I got into my story about the figure 8. As I was drawing the number on the table, the man looked directly at me for the first time, and I saw his face. Val recalled, the memory making him shiver. His face was incredibly pale, almost featureless, his mouth small and surrounded by a pair of thin, barely there lips. His nose was almost flat, but his eyes were the most frightening. They were unnaturally close together, meeting over the small bridge of his nose, but only just, intersecting at a point in between the two eyes. My eyes traced the outline. A figure 8. He stammered, spitting a spray of saliva as he struggled to make sound, chaotic and difficult. Val paused to wipe his lower lip on the cuff of his perfectly starched shirt sleeve. His professional attire was in stark contrast to his demeanor as he rapidly became a deeply anxious, stammering version of himself that I never expected when he first entered the room. Now, I'll be the first to admit I was drunk, but I know what I saw, he asserted forcefully, throwing his open hands forward as if he expected the group to attack or belittle him at any moment. No reason to worry with me, darling, I believe, Eddy reassured. I nodded in agreement with her statement, as did the rest of the group. We all knew the power of fear, the uncontrolled power of a phobia. They can play tricks on the mind, make you see things that aren't there, or rather, twist something harmless into a catastrophic version of itself, into something that demands immediate escape. He was clearly calmer at the collective response. His shoulders relaxed, his expression softened. Thank you. Anyway, I knew what I saw, and the figure 8 formed by his eyes filled me with dread, a complete contrast to the exhilaration it had once brought. My reaction both confused and worried me, but all I knew was that I had to get out. I practically flew out the door, my unfinished beer still on the table. I even left my card at the bar. I never went back for it. I should have called a taxi, but the combination of drunkenness and panic rendered me incapable of coherent planning. I hopped into my car and drove off on the familiar route home. Not a long drive. I figured I'd be fine, especially since, strangely, there were no other cars outside. Somewhere along the way, however, the route became much less familiar. There was an intersection on the road, an intersection I had never seen despite driving through it almost every day. I figured it must have been newly constructed as there were no stop signs or traffic lights or anything, he explained, shaking his head in disbelief. I still cautiously slowed down, stopped, and continued. I reassured myself that I was almost home, just a few more minutes. But where the road should have continued straight towards my house, a slight, unexpected right turn appeared. Drunk and disoriented, I followed the new turn and kept driving, suddenly realizing the unusual curvature of the road. Roads that I knew to be quite straight now forced me to turn the steering wheel gently to stay on course. Val became increasingly frantic, his eyes wide, his hands gesticulating as he spoke breathlessly. And then somehow I was back at that intersection, but from a different direction. I rolled through it, then followed the strange curve of the road up a slight left turn that shouldn't have been there. It was wrong, but I was drunk. I needed to get home. Sure that I would be fine if I just got home and laid down, so I turned and continued until I found myself back there, back at the bar. Tegan gasped, involuntarily taking a drag from her cigarette, smoke escaping in uneven puffs as she wheezed and coughed. After her coughing fit subsided, Val cleared his throat into his fist. The man in the hooded coat was standing outside, waving, which only added to my panic. I slammed on the accelerator, telling myself, this time I'll make it home, this time it'll be normal, this time I'll be fine. But I didn't actually believe any of it. My fears were confirmed as I reached that intersection again, drove through it, saw that right turn diverting from the normal route, returned to that intersection again, then the left turn, then back at the bar. It took me a few loops to realize I was driving in a figure eight pattern the shape I had essentially worshipped for years. The thing I thought was the meaning of life itself. It was infinite, but not infinite in joy and beauty as I had always believed, but endless, a horrific, monotonous trap that sent me into a panic, yearning to escape like a caged animal. I followed that route over and over again for what felt like hours. I finally lost all desire to live. If death meant escape from the trap I found myself caught in, I would gladly accept it. I sped up, weaving between lanes until I reached 90 miles an hour. I veered off course, my tires screeching as I made a sharp right turn off the road and slammed straight into a tree. Alex's jaw dropped. I'm surprised you're still here with us today. Val laughed sardonically, a harsh, grim sound, a patch of sweat having spread under his arms throughout his animated telling. I actually died, but I was resuscitated after the homeowner where I crashed called for help. I broke numerous bones and suffered a severe brain injury. I fell into a coma. Even when I woke up, I was completely unresponsive to my surroundings for a while. My sister visited me every day, staying by my side and caring for me in small ways. I eventually recovered, not fully, of course. I moved in with my sister when I was finally discharged from the hospital because I needed help remembering things sometimes. One day, she asked me what I saw when I died, when I was in a coma, when I was awake but unresponsive. The first tears welled in his dark eyes as he added, I told her I saw a light, that I was surrounded by infinite love and warmth. My sister is a woman of faith. I told her what she wanted to hear. Because I couldn't bear to break her heart. I couldn't bear to tell her what I truly saw, what I now know lies beyond this life. The reality is, when I died, I saw nothing. Val revealed grimly, then chuckled in spite of himself. Somehow, I was finally right about the meaning of life, the universe, all of it. It's an infinite, never-ending figure eight. But like that road, it's endless in its monotony, in its nothingness, in its loneliness, in its darkness. Once I knew what happened after I first opened my eyes in that hospital bed, my phobia of the figure eight was cemented. While I was locked in that lingering nothingness, the darkness from the moments I had died, conscious, but only just, my sister told me that I didn't look at her like a normal person when she spoke or if she entered the room. Instead, my eyes, they moved rapidly, continuously looking around the room, repeatedly drawing. A figure eight, he stammered, digging his fingernails into his palms as he began to cry softly. Since then, my reverence for the figure eight has been completely replaced by anxiety, panic, and dread. I am a complete recluse. I keep to myself and mostly stay in my room, because whenever I see the number 8, I am plunged back into that darkness. At first, I only realized when my sister would find me, sometimes hours later, and startle me back to alertness. I only realized then that I had been tracing the shape of the figure 8 with my eyes, lost in the endless void it represented. "Oh, Dawn," John just said simply with a short, wheezing laugh. Despite his flippant demeanor, his face was visibly flushed, which led me to believe he was actually quite shaken by Val's story. He struck me as the type of man who kept his emotions at a distance, a man from a culture and generation that forced him to suppress fear or anxiety any weakness. "You people have some of the most specific fears I've never really heard of," he added, flashing his slip of paper for the group to see, revealing the number 4 scrawled on it. "As for me, I'm a simple man, I'm John, and I have nyctophobia. I have a fear of the dark." I must confess I was surprised by his admission. A fear of the dark is certainly common, but I never expected it from a guy like John. Leaning slightly to my left, I eagerly awaited his story. Given his rather crude remarks so far, I thought he must have something good. John folded his burly arms across his chest, just above his protruding belly over his white polo shirt. "I've been afraid of the dark since I was a little kid," he began. "I know it's a pretty normal thing to be afraid of when you're little, but I wasn't just afraid, I was terrified." Cecily shrugged, adjusting her eye patch slightly. "I understand. I don't like being in the dark either after what happened to me." Some of the rest of the group nodded in agreement. A fear of the dark is almost innate. The corpulent man replied to her gesture with his own broad shrug. "I think you'll also understand that for me, it was much, much more than that. With most kids, you just give them a nightlight and, problem solved. But not with me. As soon as the sun started to set each evening, I'd turn on every single light in the house. I couldn't sleep over at friends' houses, couldn't go to the movies. Hell, I was even afraid to close my eyes sometimes," he explained, shaking his head as he smiled weakly, looking down at his lap, seemingly almost ashamed. Needless to say, this drove my parents crazy. My old man would just complain endlessly about me making the electric bill so high it would drive him into poverty. Now I understand where he was coming from, but as a kid, all I could think about was how scared I was in the dark. Whatever could be lurking there, just waiting to devour me the moment it could, John remarked, clenching one hand into a tight fist as he finished his sentence. Now my parents weren't really the type to coddle me. Therapy wasn't an option in my family. So after a few years of putting up with my nonsense, my dad decided to handle the problem himself, he continued, his voice taking on a slightly melancholic tone I hadn't heard from him yet. He picked me up as I kicked and screamed and locked me in a closet, turned off the light, and locked me in there by myself in the dark. Alex leaned back in his chair, startled. "That's horrific, John." John waved a hand in an exaggerated shrug, clearly finding it easier to dismiss his own emotions than to acknowledge the pain his father's actions had caused him. "Yeah, I mean, he was just like that, everything was just like that," he replied indifferently, running a hand through his thinning reddish hair, streaked with gray and sparse with age. "Anyway, I was in that closet for hours, probably, screaming and crying until I was exhausted. Then I just sat down, hugged my knees to my chest, and waited for him to let me out. I sat there in silence for a few minutes when I suddenly got the feeling that I wasn't alone. Of course, I couldn't see, so I couldn't know, but I knew if that makes any sense. I just sat there, frozen in terror, telling myself my mind was just playing tricks on me, until I felt something long and sharp dragging up the length of my arm. I heard a growl, quick and shallow. I started screaming again and begging my parents to let me out, and then it attacked me." Thomasine tilted her head to one side, the area under her eyes still lightly stained with smeared makeup. "You mean you actually felt it?" she asked. He nodded slowly in response, letting the implications of the silent confirmation sink into our minds. A palpable uneasiness fell over the room, enveloping us. It raked me hard down the arm before my mom finally took pity on me and let me out. I bolted from the closet and slammed it shut behind me. I didn't speak for days afterwards," he exhaled, grinding his teeth. "Of course, my old man insisted I had done it to myself just to get out. And I mean, I couldn't see anything. Maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me, making me do it to myself. I couldn't know. Regardless, I wasn't going to risk it from then on. As I got older, I didn't grow out of my fear of the dark like most kids, but it became manageable for a while as I got into adulthood. I still had to sleep with a light on, but I didn't worry about it all day like I had when I was little." The red-haired man chuckled awkwardly, his pale green eyes anchored as the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes crinkled. "As you can imagine, a grown man afraid of the dark, well, it didn't make things easy for me romantically," he admitted, his naturally rosy cheeks turning a deeper shade of red. "Eventually, I met a girl who accepted me and my strange fear. We fell in love and got married pretty quickly. Her name was Rachel, and she was, the light of my life, as they say. With Rachel, everything was easy. I was still scared, but I felt safe with her. For the first time in my life, I felt happy. So when she suggested I take her camping for our first anniversary, of course, I agreed. I was worried about being out in the dark, but she reassured me there would be a full moon. We'd have a campfire, bring lanterns, and of course, I'd have my flashlight with me at all times." John buried his flushed face in his hands, a simple gold wedding band on his finger, swollen on either side of the ring, as if he had gained significant weight since first putting it on. I should have known to stay home. I should have known what I could lose out there in the dark. As Val placed a large hand on John's shoulder, John flinched from the comforting gesture. Tegan exhaled a large plume of smoke into the center of the circle. "No rush, John," Eddy offered gently, again demonstrating her calming presence in the group as John removed his hands from his face to place them on his lap. A few moments passed before he continued. "We drove to this campground. It started raining right after we set up camp, but Rachel was so excited. I couldn't bring myself to ask her to leave. I tried to hide my anxiety by staying close to the lantern. And I actually felt okay because it was a pretty bright night once the rain passed. After a few beers, we went into the tent to sleep. I could feel she was proud of me. I woke up alone a few hours later. I didn't know what happened to Rachel, but I grabbed my flashlight and rushed out into the woods. I could hear something out there. Afraid Rachel might be lost or hurt, I walked deeper into the woods, following the sound of breaking branches, rustling dry leaves, sweeping the flashlight beam back and forth," he explained, the pace of his story increasing as he turned his head from side to side, as if he were still in that forest, still looking for his wife. John took a sharp breath through clenched teeth as he recalled. And then my flashlight bulb started to flicker. The batteries were dying. I frantically swept around with the remaining light, and in the intermittent flashes, I finally saw it. The thing from the closet years ago, the thing from the dark. It was slightly shorter than me, incredibly gaunt. Bones protruding, pressing against its paper-thin, pale skin, covered in a sparse layer of thin white fur. When I finally caught sight of its face, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Until I heard that quick, shallow growl sniffing. It had no eyes, but beneath where they should have been were two large, deep black holes cracked at the edges. A pair of massive nostrils. At the very bottom of its face, where a human's chin would be, was its mouth, always open, agape, drooling. It ran quickly on two legs, but its arms, well, they were something else entirely. At the elbow, each arm blossomed from pale flesh into bony protrusions, each ending in a sharp point with smaller spikes jutting up and down either side, giving it an almost serrated appearance. I shivered at the thought, pulling my sweater tight around myself, as if the room's temperature had caused the reaction, tucking my hands into my khaki shorts pockets. He continued. The flashlight's light finally died completely. I looked up at the bright night sky for release and watched in horror as the star directly above me flickered, then died. Each star around it followed suit until the very light of the moon suddenly went out, leaving me in absolute darkness for the first time since the closet. But much, much worse. That's when I heard Rachel scream. I ran towards her voice, tripping over fallen trees in the darkness, low-hanging branches whipping at my face. I finally reached her, calling out to her, and she screamed back in response. In the darkness, I couldn't clearly see what was happening, but this is what I was able to piece together afterwards. I heard the monster's growl. It seemed to have pinned her down, one of its sharp appendages having pierced through her shoulder and the forest floor beneath. Grabbing my large hunting knife, I plunged the blade into the source of the quick sniffs. The monster shrieked, letting her go, the knife embedded somewhere in its back. I bent down to help Rachel up, half carrying, half dragging her as we ran through the darkness. The quick sniffs and growls pursued us closely until we saw light at the edge of the forest, a clearing our campsite. The red-haired man's face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed as he fought back tears. We stumbled out of the woods into the clearing where, instead of our campsite, we found two stunned strangers, two men. Rachel broke free from my grip, fell to the ground, and crawled on her hands and knees towards them, grimacing in pain as her left hand touched the ground. Her arm was nearly severed at the shoulder where the monster had pinned her down. She screamed for help at the two men. "Please help me, he's crazy. He tried to kill me." John choked back a sob, tears falling as he finally succumbed to the agony. "She wouldn't even look at me. I'm so grateful she didn't die that night, but I lost her completely." I know what I saw, but of course, I sounded like I had completely lost my mind. I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for a while. I finally just told them what they wanted to hear just to get out. Over the years, I've replayed that night in my head. Was I truly crazy? Did I actually hurt my wife? Or was the monster real? Rachel could never explain why she was out in the woods that night, insisting I must have chased her in there and stabbed her with my knife. The knife I had plunged into the back of that thing was never found. He sighed, wiping tears along the back of a burly arm before rubbing his forehead with his fingertips, his mind weary from solving a problem he had probably spent a decade trying to solve. A problem with no clear solution. I used to fear the dark because I was afraid of what could be lurking in the darkness with me, he sighed, biting the inside of his lower lip. Now I know what lives in the dark, but there's something about the dark that frightens me, even more than that repulsive beast. I think what frightens me the most about it is not knowing what I might do in the dark, not knowing what I'm capable of in the dark, not knowing who I am in the dark. I want to take a moment to thank all of you for the insightful feedback you've given me so far. I've shared some of your comments with the other members of my support group, and many of them have been incredibly touched by your kind words of encouragement. For those of us who live controlled by constant fear, being able to empathize with people we've never met, or even just being shown kindness, in general, can be a rarity. We have spent most of our lives being dismissed by others, told to just get over it. We are constantly reminded of the irrationality of our fears by those we love most, those whose acceptance we crave. Family, friends, lovers, partners, spouses. Our steps to avoid encountering what we fear most are ignored. In some cases, extreme measures are taken to try and fix us, in many cases making everything much worse. I think of John, a little boy with bright green eyes, screaming and crying in the darkness of a locked closet, and I tear up thinking about it now. From the bottom of my bitter heart, thank you. I want to jump ahead and share with you the situation I am in now. The cure has been revealed to me, but it is still important for the process that I adhere to the order that was designated to us from the very first moment we sat down in that empty classroom of that old abandoned church. It is important that I honor the stories that came before mine, for they have fundamentally changed my life. Now, that means I must return to participant number 5. All right, that's enough, John remarked just moments after finishing his story. His demeanor shifted immediately from distraught to his usual nonchalant ease. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs forward, his tattered white tennis shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. I was suddenly reminded of my own father, who would wear a pair of sneakers until the soles were almost worn through, a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of guy. Who's next? I started at a sound immediately to my right. Eddy cleared her throat repeatedly. I think that would be me, she mumbled, unfolding her slip of paper to confirm that she was indeed participant number 5. The elderly woman appeared to be at least 90 years old, though I was only basing this assumption on her striking resemblance to my own grandmother in the years before she passed away. The same permed gray hair, the large pearl necklace around her neck with matching earrings, her sweet, gentle smile, and the almost melodic rhythm in her voice had kept me at ease throughout the group session so far. She had the same slender hands with paper-thin, pale skin, barely covering the bones, veins, and joints swollen with arthritis beneath. The only major difference between them was the black tracksuit she was wearing. My Ruth wore pastels and bright colors. She always said black was for mourning, not for living. Eddy tucked the slip of paper back into her pocket before introducing herself. I'm Obedience, but all my friends call me Eddy. I have bathmophobia. A mischievous smile played on her wrinkled face as she waved a finger at John, clearly joking. And before you judge, John, I'm not afraid of baths, dear. The group erupted in laughter, with John joining in. So what are you afraid of, Eddy? Val asked, the sound of his deep, resonant, warm voice signaling the group to quiet down, much like a professor. The elderly woman waited for the laughter to completely subside before replying, I'm afraid of stairs. Nodding, I considered, I can understand why someone your age might have such a fear. A fall down the stairs would almost certainly result in a broken hip or worse. Now, I know what you young folks are thinking. An old lady like me, of course she's afraid of stairs. One tumble down and I'd be in the hospital for sure. If I was lucky, I'd have my life alert on, she remarked with a wink. I've been afraid of stairs since I was a little kid. I was actually the only child with this phobia that our family doctor had ever encountered at the time it first appeared. Though when I was little, I believed I actually had climacophobia, the fear of climbing stairs, not just the stairs themselves. But we didn't have all those different names for everything back then like we do now, she continued, raising a thin eyebrow. But whether it was clearly named or not, I was terrified of climbing stairs. When I was about 10, I had a horrible fall down the stairs in our family home. I grew up wealthy in one of those old money families, so we had a massive marble staircase with many turns from the upper floor down. I was playing at the top of the stairs when I lost my balance and tumbled all the way down. Oh my, I nearly broke every bone in my body, but it could have been much worse. It took what felt like decades to recover. For a kid who couldn't do much more than lie in bed, it was truly miserable. But I was a strong little girl anyway, and I got better. Mostly, that is. Peeling the 100th cigarette she had lit since arriving, Tegan lifted her deeply hollowed eyes to meet Eddy's. Your body recovered, but your mind never did it? Eddy pointed a finger back at her. You are quite right, dear. I refused to go up or down those stairs. My father forced me, but I just felt dizzy and anxious the moment I set foot on the first step. My mind irrationally exaggerated the slope. Climbing that flight of stairs felt equivalent to climbing the face of a mountain that was almost completely vertical. From there, well, it all just went downhill, she stated, looking down at her lap, shaking her head softly. I couldn't go back to school, so my mother homeschooled me. I lost all my friends. All I had for the rest of my childhood were books, the garden, an overburdened mother, and a father who thought I was damaged goods, useless. The gray-haired woman sighed deeply as she contemplated the sudden turn her life had taken at such a young age. Thomasine broke the silence, speaking up, You're not useless. Thank you, dear, Eddy replied warmly, crossing her arms neatly over her knees as she straightened her back. When I became an adult, there was a lot of argument around the house about what I could become with my condition. My parents wanted me to marry a rich man of status, but no one wanted me. So when the mailman saw me out in the garden and we took a liking to each other, my dad told him, his voice slurred with the smell of whiskey, If you want her, you can have her. Cecily snorted from the other side of the circle. My exact sentiment, Eddy chuckled softly in response. We got married and we had a rather decent life. He didn't make a lot of money, but he worked hard. We cared for each other, though we grew distant over time. At first, he was very supportive of my phobia. But as we aged, and as my parents passed away, one right after the other, he insisted that we move into their house, the house with the marble staircase. He was tired of toiling away and wanted a little ease. I reluctantly agreed, she recalled carefully, the anxiety surrounding the agreement evident. At first, all my needs were met on the ground floor, but eventually he wanted to move into the master bedroom on the top floor together. I worked tirelessly to overcome my fear, not wanting it to control me any longer. For months, he would hold me as I took one first step, then a few steps, then eventually the entire staircase. Though I must confess, the first time I made it to the top, I vomited right there on the floor. She laughed in spite of herself, shaking her head softly. I was still a little anxious and dizzy each time, but as long as my husband was with me, I could finally climb those damn stairs. A puzzled expression crossed Alex's face. It sounds like you had largely overcome your phobia, at least. Why are you here? Her eyebrows furrowed, the wrinkles on her forehead deepening in a grim expression. Because it came back about 5 years ago, but much, much worse. So much worse, she replied grimly, wringing her hands together so tightly I feared the fragile skin would tear. I woke up late one night alone. My husband wasn't the type to get out of bed in the middle of the night, so I was immediately worried. I sat up in bed and noticed a faint light spilling in from the hallway. I went to investigate and found that the chandelier was on the one that illuminated the staircase, and the staircase that curved below. And then my husband emerged from the shadows of the hallway and pushed me. I gasped involuntarily. No. I fell down the first flight of steps onto the landing, she replied, her voice soft and chilling. I heard the thump of my husband's bare feet slap down on the marble steps as he descended after me. I decided to pretend as if I had lost consciousness, and when he reached me on the landing, I grabbed his ankle and pushed him. I watched him tumble down the remaining steps, though I couldn't see him at the bottom due to the turns in the staircase. Now I knew he had just tried to kill me, but I wasn't about to just leave him there to die. My body aching, I got back to my feet. I looked down the steps I had been able to descend for years at that point as they suddenly became grotesquely steep with each step at least a few feet deep. Both hands gripping the railing tightly, I slowly took the first step, pausing briefly to compose myself, and continued. My hands were slick with sweat. The grip on the railing was precarious. But I continued until I reached the second landing. That staircase had 3 flights of stairs with 8 steps each and 2 landings in between. I knew this for sure because I had learned to count each step to keep myself calm. Now I was at the second landing. I knew that as soon as I turned the corner, there would only be one more flight of stairs, and then I would reach my husband. However, imagine my horror as I turned to take the final flight of steps. I could not see my husband at the bottom, nor could I see the end of the staircase as another landing appeared. And then, well, a new step opened up at the bottom. Boom, 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 boom. 7 more steps, quickly following one after the other, a new flight of 8 steps down to yet another new landing. Eddy squeezed her eyes shut, inhaling through her nose and exhaling through pursed lips, perhaps a coping mechanism she had learned for anxiety. Even so, I continued forward, fearing for both my life and my husband's, down what should have been the final flight of stairs and onto the new one as the loud sounds of new steps falling into place echoed throughout my house again. My husband began to groan, began to cry, begging for help, asking what had happened. I called down to him that there had been an accident. He mumbled for a few minutes, then started yelling, "Obedience, you goddamn useless cow. Get down here right now." She uttered in a voice so venomous, so filled with hatred, I could barely believe it escaped her. I tried to explain what was happening, but the words wouldn't come to me, and as I continued to climb down the stairs, more and more steps appeared, increasing exponentially. The incessant booming sounds were deafening until I felt impossibly high. But when I looked back, the staircase continued to stretch so far behind and above me that I couldn't even see the top anymore. The chandelier was just a distant glow like a star in the night. I continued down, frantic and hysterical, trapped in this endless maze of stairs, while my husband alternated between softly begging me and screaming at me, insulting me, ordering me to hurry and help him. By the time it was finally near, and I finally made it down, I was drenched in sweat, my legs trembling from exhaustion, and my husband was silent. The elderly woman began to cry softly as she continued. I ran to the phone to call for help. The ambulance arrived soon after. As they opened the door, I realized it was already morning. Looking back at the staircase, I realized I had spent at least 12 hours climbing down 24 steps. My husband was dead. Yearning for some connection to family, I now had no one. I went back to researching my family history soon after my husband passed away. I discovered that my grandmother Obedience, whom I was named after, had died after a fall down that very staircase. I found some old photos of her, and oh my goodness, she looked exactly like me. There were rumors that her husband had pushed her to her death. After my own husband pushed me that awful night, I was convinced it was true. Now I know that my husband wasn't himself when he tried to kill me. When I pushed him, he looked confused, she explained, pulling a tissue from her pocket to wipe her tears. I have been terrified of the sight of stairs ever since. I can't climb stairs, let alone look at one, without instantly breaking down in an anxiety attack. I don't know if any of you believe in fate or anything of that sort, but I believe it is my destiny to die as my grandmother Obedience died broken and bloodied at the bottom of the stairs. I've survived twice already, and I don't think I'll be so lucky again. I want to apologize for how long it's been since I last updated you on the progress of the support group. I must confess that as we drew closer to my own story, I felt that familiar anxiety return. I have done terrible things because of my phobia, and it will be difficult to recount these events to all of you, given the kindness you have shown me and the others. I've shared some of your comments with Eddy, who was incredibly touched by the empathy shown to her. I can only hope to receive the same, though I know I don't deserve it at this point. Next was Tegan, the young woman so gaunt she was almost skeletal, probably in her late 20s, I'd guess. With a perpetually burning cigarette wedged between her fingers or lips. With her hollowed cheeks and deep-set gray eyes, it was hard to imagine she had eaten a full meal in at least the past year. Her wispy, dull, and dusty blonde hair and yellow-stained, brittle fingernails from constant exposure to cigarette smoke further cemented this assumption. An oversized sweater hung off one bony shoulder, and yoga pants clung to her protruding knees, the bottom of the pant legs messily tucked into a pair of Uggs. "I'm Tegan," she said after lighting another cigarette, bowing the tip of the cigarette to the flame of a cheap lighter. "Before I begin, I want to clarify one thing. I'm sure you all think you've got me all figured out. Look at her skinny butt, she must have an eating disorder. She must be afraid of food." As she mocked, repeating every assumption I had thought in my head, a wave of guilt washed over me. I wondered what preconceived notions others had about me, about my missing hand. As the group remained silent, she chuckled sarcastically. Yeah, I know. And while those two things are technically true, at least to some extent, that's not why I'm here and it's not what you think. I have choking phobia, fear of choking. She clarified, sitting up straight in her chair. I couldn't imagine how easy it was for her to sit for so long, given her severe lack of body fat. I do have an eating disorder, but I'm not anorexic. I have sleep-related eating disorder, SRED, she explained, drawing air quotes with a pair of bony fingers on her free hand. She took a drag from her cigarette before continuing. Basically, I compulsively eat in my sleep. I'm not aware of what I'm doing at the time, truly unaware of what I'm doing, and I usually forget when I've had an episode. Though sometimes I have a raspy feeling in my throat the next day, as if I'd been choking on food. Given how quickly these episodes take place, only about 10 minutes total, I wouldn't be surprised if I was actually choking on food on its way down. I only truly fully remember what happened when I get out of bed in the morning, only to find my kitchen completely destroyed. I mean, pots and pans everywhere, empty snack and candy wrappers littering the kitchen, sticky goo pooling on the floor mixed with leftover crumbs from my uncontrolled feast. She sighed, smoke drifting from her pale, chapped lips as she flicked her cigarette ash. And I eat the weirdest things. I chugged an entire bottle of seltzer, massive quantities of peanut butter scooped out of the jar with my bare hands. Even things I'd never imagine eating during the day. I'm a vegetarian, but in my sleep, I'd eat my roommate's raw butter sticks. A jar of mayonnaise, she recounted, visibly nauseated at the thought. The idea also made my stomach clench. The gaunt young woman inhaled her cigarette, the tip burning low. Eventually, I moved out on my own, a combination of disgust with the animal products I had eaten and the shame I felt trying to explain my disorder to her. I packed up my belongings and my pet rat, Rex. She was interrupted by Thomasine flinching from the other side of the circle. As the group turned to look at her, she blushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry, she spoke softly. I don't like rats. Their tails they bother me. Tegan shot a look towards the girl. Rats are actually very intelligent, kind, and social creatures. They make great pets, she remarked, a hint of disappointment in her voice. I listened to your weird story, now you can listen to mine. Thomasine nodded timidly, her face red. I'm sorry. As Tegan steadied her nerves with another long drag, Eddy reassured. Go on whenever you're ready, dear. We're all listening intently here. Thank you, Eddy, she replied, turning towards the elderly woman but blowing smoke from the side of her mouth, away from Eddy. I moved into my own place fairly soon after the first episodes, actually quite common to develop this disorder in adulthood. I tried to control it. I did all the right things. Sleep studies, medication, therapy, even damn hypnosis. She described with a grim chuckle as she tapped the burning tip of her cigarette into the ashtray. Nothing worked, so eventually I just gave up and tried to alter my environment to manage the episodes as best I could. I cleared the pathways to the kitchen and locked up all the knives to at least be safe. Then I locked up all the food each night to make it harder to get to. And guess what? She asked emphatically, her gray eyes widened slightly, faint semicircular dark circles prominent beneath them. It actually worked. No more waking up to a messy kitchen, no more shame or embarrassment, no more losing control, no more episodes. She stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray, dropping it into the container below before retrieving a fresh one to repeat the endless process. But it seems I forgot the most important thing, she declared, completely unintelligible with the cigarette clenched between her teeth. As she paused to light her lighter, Val asked, What do you mean? Tegan took a few rapid drags to create an even flame before replying, The food itself wasn't the problem, I was the problem. I woke up one morning to that familiar scratchy feeling in my throat, but relieved to find a clean kitchen. I unlocked everything to make breakfast, actually enjoying the feeling of morning hunger for once. Then I went into the utility room to let Rex out to play for a bit, but found his cage open, and he wasn't in it. I started to panic until the smell of sour, acrid vomit assailed my nostrils. I followed the smell to the corner of the room, and well, that's when I found him. Now, if any of you are sensitive to animal suffering, I completely understand. And you might want to step out for a few minutes, she warned, glancing around the circle to see if there was any movement or reaction worth pausing for, flicking a column of ash from the far end of her cigarette. As we remained still and silent for a few moments, she continued. I found the rat dead in a puddle of vomit, his poor little body still intact, but his tiny bones, they had been crushed. She choked back a sob, tears welling in her deep-set eyes. "Oh, Tegan," Cecily cooed, as the gaunt young woman buried her face in her free hand and began to sob. "I'm so sorry." She shook her head slowly in penitence before regaining enough composure to continue her story with several shaky, long drags of her cigarette. And then the memory came to me, just like with all my other sleep-eating episodes in the past. The moment I found the evidence. I remember opening his cage, pulling him out by his tail as he shrieked. I remember him scratching the inside of my mouth in terror. Until I bit down on his precious little head, she cried uncontrollably, her breath quick and shallow. I started to swallow him whole until his wriggling tail triggered my gag reflex as it slid down my throat. She gasped, pausing briefly to wipe her eyes and take a drag from her cigarette. That's when I started to choke, my eyes watering. I knelt to the floor, coughing and retching. The sudden lack of oxygen was suffocating and plunged me into a panic. I reached my fingers down my throat to grasp the tip of his tail, pulling him out in several gags. Fur from his plush coat tickling the inside of my throat and jagged fragments of bone scraping the sides until finally, I pulled him out. I threw him onto the floor in the vomit, and then I just went right back to bed, completely unaware of what I had just done to my beloved companion. She wailed, her love for her pet evident. The food wasn't the problem, I was the problem. I should have locked myself up. Alex sighed loudly, reflecting the palpable tension in the room. I felt on the verge of sickness, but maintained my composure out of respect. If she had done this deliberately and voluntarily, that would be another story. But vomiting her breakfast on the floor wouldn't help her heal. Tegan stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray. I was surprised when she continued to speak instead of pausing to light another. Ever since then, any solid food I eat causes the same gagging reaction, choking me, and with it, the memory of what I did, the fear of what I might do. She sighed, blinking back a second wave of tears. I have completely isolated myself from friends and family, not wanting them to see how my body has changed, not wanting to explain to them what has caused me to be this way. I smoke to curb my appetite. I know these habits could kill me, but I know that I deserve to die anyway. I sleep in a small, locked room each night, and I only consume liquids. The fear is so strong that I have to filter all my liquids through a sieve before I can drink them, she explained grimly, clasping her bony fingers together in her lap. Because if I eat any solid food, not only will I choke on them right then and there, I'll wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, only to have to pull Rex's crushed body from my throat again. Tegan asked me to extend her sincere thanks to all of you for your kind words of encouragement. While she is still not entirely sure she deserves it, I can only hope that after reading this part, you will still graciously accept her thanks from me. Even if you hate me, please remember that I am merely the messenger for the others. Don't take your anger out on them. They have done nothing wrong. I knew this moment would come, but when I began sharing these stories with all of you, I didn't realize how unsettling it would be to expose my shameful past to a crowd of anonymous individuals. Perhaps it's because I've come to think of many of you more as friends than strangers. In a way, you have all become an extension of my support group, and I need you more than ever. My hands are trembling as I type these lines, for it is my turn. As Tegan finished her story, a huge lump formed in my throat, followed by a sudden surge of anxiety. It had been comforting to listen to the stories of others, to know that I wasn't alone in my fear, to understand that others had lost so much or been driven to extreme circumstances because of fear. However, from the very first moment I read the message on the whiteboard, I knew that I didn't belong there, didn't deserve to be there. My heart pounding, I rose from my chair with such urgency that the flimsy chair legs scraped against the linoleum floor, the harsh sound breaking the silence. "What is it, child?" Eddy asked, craning her neck to turn towards me, a look of both pity and confusion on her wrinkled face. I just shook my head again, fear having stolen my words. "Is it your turn?" Val asked, frowning, his tie still loose around his neck. Nodding, I began to tremble. I was afraid tears would soon stream down. "Please, sit down, we want to hear from you," Alex said gently. "You don't understand," I choked back, blinking rapidly to hold back tears. "I shouldn't be here. I don't have a tragic story like yours. I'm just afraid." Cecily leaned forward, the adornments on her eye patch catching the light, sparkling. We understand, perhaps more than anyone else. Fear is normal, all of us are, she reassured. The rest of the group nodded to affirm her words. Something brought you here today, just as it brought the rest of us. Your phobia controls your life. Talk about it. Please, we want to know. Something in her voice and the anxious look in her visible eye calmed my nerves. I sat back down in my chair, nodding as I replied. Okay, I'll tell you, I'm warning you now. This story doesn't make me look good at all, but it was the lowest point of my life. I'm trusting you. I'm Evina, but everyone calls me Eve. I have trypophobia, the fear of clusters of holes. Isn't that just something you millennials made up? John asked, a mischievous smile on his face, reminding me not to take him too seriously. Chuckling softly, I returned his smile. I've heard it all. Yes, it was named quite recently, but Eddy said it earlier, we don't always have names for things that are truly, truly very real. I replied, rubbing my hands along the rough denim of my jeans, sweat having already formed on my palms. Furthermore, there's research to support that there may be an evolutionary basis for trypophobia. Some venomous animals bear similar patterns to clusters of holes, for example, honeycomb coral. The mention of my triggers brought mental images of their shapes, the thought of dense, harmless holes, yet inexplicably horrifying. My body began to itch, first the back of my head, then the side of my neck. My phobia doesn't just cause fear, it makes my skin crawl. As if I can feel the holes on me bubbling with an itchy infection, an unsatisfiable irritation. I pushed up the sleeve of my moss-green sweater to scratch my fingernails along my forearm, fully revealing my missing left hand for the first time since I had sat down. I've been afraid since I was a child, I continued, clearing my dry throat. My parents didn't really know what was going on with me, and neither did I just knew that I couldn't bear the sight of a pomegranate. I couldn't wade in the tide pools near my house. I couldn't do anything without worrying about what I might see. As a child, I had no friends, didn't even feel close to my family. As an adult, I eventually went to therapy. I learned many coping mechanisms that helped somewhat, but mainly just to prevent anxiety. And even then, if I was caught off guard, it would be too late. I sighed, a deep hollow forming in my stomach. Eventually, I turned to drugs to self-medicate. Stimulants, sedatives, I didn't care, just anything to redirect my focus, and nothing did that for me like meth. I glanced around the room to gauge the group's reaction to this admission. I expected nothing but the disgust and hatred I had faced at home. My mother screaming through tears about the life I had thrown away. Strangers scoffing with upturned noses as I lay detoxing on the beach. However, there was no sign of disapproval from the rest of the circle. Their attention remained entirely on me. Their shallow nods urged me to continue. When I was on meth, something would grab my attention, and I could focus on that instead of my own baseless fears. I would scrub the sink of a motel room for hours. I would sit down and write the book I always meant to write. I would discuss a topic of conversation until it was completely exhausted. I explained with a fleeting sadness as I recalled the effect my use had on me then, before everything went downhill. I had a friend. He was my dealer at the time, and I used with him. Memories immediately flooded in, a monotonous buzzing, a sharp pain, a thump beneath, but somehow, above all, holes. Steadying myself with a deep breath, I clarified. I can't say I remember much of what we did together, but I know that I cared for him, and we were very close as two people could be with their heads always in the clouds, never coming back down to earth. Tears welled in my eyes as a longing washed over me, a desperation for a time before all this guilt. A few years ago, I woke up to a message from him saying he had just gotten a new batch from a new distributor and wanted to try it out with me. Of course, I agreed, and we arranged to meet at our usual spot, some cliffs overlooking the ocean. I hopped in my car and drove off as soon as it got dark. When I arrived, he was already in the parking lot, sitting in the back of his truck as he carefully tapped some white powder onto a discarded plate. Of all things, I sighed, shaking my head with a sad chuckle. I sat down next to him as he used his ID card to pull the powder into two thin lines, the same old ritual. He offered me the first line, then he finished the second. And oh, I said simply, emphasizing the short sentence with a sharp intake of breath through my teeth. The high was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The rush was immediate and intense, so much so that I thought for a moment I might be overdosing. I remember thinking that if I was dying, death seemed pretty great. Of course, I was just high as hell as I had been hundreds of times before. but I realized quite quickly that something was wrong. We hopped over the guardrail blocking pedestrians from the cliffs, probably about 6 feet of rock before a sheer drop down to the ocean. Everything was normal for a few minutes, or at least our version of normal, walking back and forth, rambling on about a random topic, as if we had discovered the truth behind everything from toasters to why women's jeans have such tiny pockets. I reminisced, chuckling grimly at a past version of myself I was deeply ashamed of. And then I started hallucinating. A loose gasp escaped Thomasine's lips. "What did you see?" I scratched my short fingernails over the stump at the end of my left arm, inflamed with imaginary irritation. It's not uncommon to hallucinate when you're on meth, mostly auditory. I'd never had visual hallucinations until that night. I exhaled, looking around the circle to absorb the palpable sympathy that would almost certainly soon end. I'm sure you're familiar with, the sores meth users can get. My friend, he had them pretty bad, all over his face and hands mostly. They never really triggered me because they were flat wounds rather than holes. But high as a kite that night, I noticed that his sores began to, expand slightly, then sink inwards, hollowing out until his skin was covered in a massive cluster of holes. Tears welled in my eyes. I clenched my teeth hard. Eddy placed a slender hand on my knee and offered gently, "Slow down, dear." That was all it took to push me over the edge. Tears began to stream down my face. At that moment, I just wanted to finish the story, just as I do now. I have carried the shame of my actions in secret since that night, and I still struggle under the immense burden of guilt that I know I deserve. I wiped my face on my sleeve before pulling it up under my nose. I wished I had brought tissues. I needed everything to end, so I continued. I just stared at him, more at the holes than at him, as my anxiety mounted, skyrocketing into dread. The stimulant I had voluntarily taken, I don't even know for sure if it was meth, was not helping. The holes in his skin grew deeper, bottomless, leaving me speechless. That's when I noticed something, wriggling its way out of him. I groaned, the nauseating image returning in full force. The first one burrowed out of his cheek, a damn maggot, puffed up to enormous size. The edges of the sore stretched as it forced its fat body, pale yellow and speckled with black dots, out of the hole to writhe on his face. Another came soon after from his chin, another and another and another from his neck, shoulder, forearm. They just kept coming relentlessly, hundreds of them, until I could barely see his face anymore. And his arms were covered in the disgusting things, like a pair of writhing sleeves. The maggots began to burst open as flies erupted from their shriveled bodies, peeling away as empty husks fell to the ground, piling up at his feet. I bent down to vomit as my friend asked, "What the hell is going on?" When I looked back at him, he was obscured by a swarm of flies. I groaned, the deafening buzz of their collective noise piercing my ears. Hundreds of them, they were incredibly large, each about the size of an egg, perhaps, with coarse hairs on their bloated, segmented bodies, flying on paper-thin wings towards me. In that moment, everything felt too real. I swore on my worthless life that I believed these parasitic flies would lay their eggs in me next if I didn't stop them. Some of the others had gone completely pale. I thought some of them might soon be sick. "Calm down," Alex asked. "How did you stop them?" Eve succumbed to the agony. I let my tears flow freely, though I doubted I had any real control at that point. As I was frantically swatting the flies away, I saw that the maggots were still tunneling their way out of him, escaping from within his body to transform into the monstrous flies. An endless cycle that would end with these things in me, that would end with holes on my body. And I couldn't have that. I was in full fight-or-flight mode. At that point, I pushed him backwards, and he stumbled to the edge of the cliff. One more push, and he fell. I only realized as I collapsed to my knees, the jagged rocks scraping my exposed skin, that he had grabbed my left hand. Dangling over the edge of the cliff, he looked up at me. Though I could barely see him through the swarm of flies, could barely think through their incessant buzzing. And he pleaded for help. "God damn it," Tegan drawled, stubbing out her cigarette before lighting another. The smell of stale smoke combined with the intrusive memories of that awful night made my head spin. "What did you do?" I locked my eyes on the worn floor, unable to face the group. I frantically looked from the cloud of flies surrounding his face to the steady stream of writhing maggots burrowing out of his arms, then to his hand, which seemed to have fused with mine. Our fingers had melted together to form one long section of a shared arm, and the holes were starting to spread to me. I could have helped him up. I should have, but I started to feel a wriggling beneath my skin. I reached into my back pocket and grabbed my folding knife, flicked it open, and placed the blade on my skin. And then I started to saw back and forth. I shivered, tears falling to my lap as I recalled the feeling of the knife scraping bone. I know how ridiculous it sounds, but I completely lost my mind. The pain was unimaginable, but the worst part was him. He pleaded for his life with each cut of the knife, until I severed the bone. And gravity ripped the rest of my hand off along with him as he fell into the dark ocean below. Squinting, I dug my fingernails into my palms. The amputation was cleaned at the hospital. I told them I just did it to myself, not exactly a lie, but cowardly. When they realized I was a meth user, they didn't ask too many questions. I fled town and moved out here, cleaning up my act as much as possible. My friend's body was discovered days later, but my hand was nowhere to be found. It was ruled an accidental death. Turns out the police don't really care about junkies, I remarked bitterly. Though I know I'm the only one who can truly be blamed, I have no reason to justify my fear, and that's what makes me feel the worst. All your phobias came from something, mine was just always there. Though it's gotten much worse since the night I lost my hand. Before this happened, I never truly understood what made me so afraid of clusters of holes, I mused, cradling my remaining limb in my hand. Now I know that I'm less afraid of the holes themselves, and more afraid of what's inside them. As I described my journey with my own fear yesterday, I held my breath, anxiously awaiting the criticism I truly believed would come. Let me say that I can finally relax since the beginning of all this, since I began sharing the group's story with all of you. As kind, understanding, sympathetic comments slowly came in, I breathed the deepest sigh of relief. To be seen as human despite the horrible mistake I had made is the greatest gift I could imagine. From the bottom of my bitter heart, thank you. I started posting these stories here knowing that eventually I would share with all of you the peace I have found since attending this unconventional support group. True to the process, I have outlined each story without revealing which of us was the facilitator so that you could understand each participant without preconceived notions. We have gone through 7 stories together. Only one last story remains. After the energy of my story subsided, I glanced a few seats to my right. I looked at Alex, the final participant. He was a handsome man in a conventional, if unremarkable, way. Probably in his early 40s, with stylishly cut chestnut hair and a meticulously groomed beard. A pair of thick-rimmed glasses rested on the bridge of his nose, his pale blue eyes always intently observing behind them. He wore a beige Henley shirt, its top button undone, and a nice pair of faded dark jeans. I couldn't discern much about him based on his appearance, so I was curious to hear his story. Noticing the sudden attention, Alex chuckled. "Yes, I am," he began, pausing to quickly correct himself as Val straightened up on the other side of the circle. "I am the last one." He adjusted his seat, his posture impeccable. "My name is Alex. I think my fear is universal, probably the thing most people fear the most, though certainly not to the degree that I fear it," he remarked, rubbing his thumb along the layer of stubble that covered his sharp jawline. "I have monophobia. I'm afraid of being alone." I nodded, agreeing with his initial assertion. Most people truly fear ending up alone. Some of the others joined in too. "I had a somewhat unusual childhood," he stated, shaking his head back and forth. "I never knew my father, and my mother was incredibly overprotective. Looking back, I think she was just desperate not to lose me after she lost him. Understanding this now doesn't change the fact that I was the only kid I knew who wasn't allowed any privacy. I shared a room with my mother, she insisted on homeschooling me, and I wasn't allowed outside alone. Ever." Tegan laughed lazily, her deep-set eyes half-closed, a half-smoked cigarette wedged between 2 fingers. "Damn, man, how did you survive her?" Alex laughed loudly towards her. I didn't really comprehend how unusual my experience was as a kid, but as I got a little older, maybe 10 or 11, I became frustrated. I saw kids playing outdoors on television, kids playing together without parents in sight. He mused incredulously, looking off into the distance, as if the concept was still as new to him as it was decades ago. I tried to push the boundaries a bit, but she doubled down on her control, insisting she was only trying to keep me safe. I know it all sounds strange, but she was my mom, and I loved her, so I obeyed her. though I never really stopped trying to get that little bit of freedom," he admitted slyly. I didn't drop the subject completely, but I knew she would never let me just be a kid if I kept bothering her about it. I waited until my 12th birthday to ask her if she would let me ride my bicycle around the neighborhood by myself instead of around the driveway with her, watching me from her lawn chair on the front porch. I begged, I pleaded, I cried, and eventually she said yes. John's jaw dropped. "You mean you didn't ride a bike alone until you were 12? He shook his head slowly in response. "No, and honestly, I was surprised she even let me go. I could barely sleep the night before my birthday, knowing I would wake up to the most exciting day of my young life," he recalled. "First thing in the morning, I reported to my mom, then ran into the garage to get my bicycle. She watched from the window in dread as I rolled down the driveway and down the street. For the first time in my life, I was completely and utterly alone," he said, his thick eyebrows furrowing as he emphasized the last word. "I felt the wind in my hair, and I could finally focus on my thoughts. I'm pretty sure I swallowed a bug, but I didn't care. I was about halfway through my carefully planned loop when I felt something grab me." "Oh my God," Eddy mumbled, placing both slender hands over the lower half of her face. Nodding, Alex clarified, "I tumbled off my bicycle, scraping my elbows and knees as I rolled onto the sidewalk, spraining my ankle. On the ground beside me, I saw two large, dirty, cloven feet. Terrified, I crawled up to see an older man with greasy, unkempt gray hair looking down at me. An inverted cross was carved into his forehead. The symbol of evil," I remembered my mother telling me, with a line of blood drawn across his haggard face. He bent down to me and said, "Hey, little boy," Alex explained, mimicking the stranger's voice, threatening and grim. I didn't really know what to do, so I stammered something out, telling him he could have my bike if he wanted it. He just snorted, spitting a thick wad of phlegm onto the sidewalk before telling me he didn't want my bike. He wanted me. Needless to say, I panicked. I scrambled to my feet as quickly as I could and ran for my life. But I had hurt my ankle pretty bad in the fall, so I moved slowly. The man followed behind me, screaming threats at me. His voice slurred. "I'm going to get you, boy. I'm going to cut off your tiny little peepee and drink your blood. I'm going to sacrifice your body to Satan." Thomasine flinched as Alex repeated the stranger's maniacal words, his face flushed and his eyes wide. Alex paused to take a deep breath, his expression and complexion returning to normal. I almost made it past him. I burst through the door and into my mother's arms, crying so much I struggled to explain exactly what had happened. When I finally could explain, she mumbled something about the Satanists in the neighborhood causing trouble. She offered to retrieve my bicycle so we could go together another day. But the damage was already done. He sighed, shaking his head grimly. I didn't want to ride a bike again, so I mostly just stayed indoors. I was sitting in the living room watching television a few weeks later while my mom was in the kitchen making dinner. I heard a rustling behind me and saw that same stranger barely concealed in the bushes outside the window, watching me through the glass. I shivered. I refused to be alone after that, ever. The relationship between my mom and me kind of flipped, with me clinging to her more than she had ever clung to me. I would follow her around the house, moving rooms as she moved. I started climbing into bed with her each night, unable to sleep even just on the other side of the room from her. I wouldn't be caught alone again. A silence fell over the room. Cecily urged gently, "And then what happened, Alex?" He shrugged broadly. "We lived like that for a long time. She got sick a few years ago. We tried to fight it, but the illness progressed aggressively. I cared for her in her final years as she had cared for me my entire life. On the night she passed away, I sat by her bed while she slept peacefully. She woke up and took my hand in hers, then looked up at me as she said she needed to tell me something. I told her she could trust me with anything, anything. She squeezed my hand as she said, 'Son, I really messed you up, didn't I?' I shook my head. 'No.' I told her she was only good to me, but she cut me off, and that's when she told me." Alex exhaled, rubbing his palms together in obvious anxiety. "The morning of my 12th birthday, she had hired that stranger to terrorize me, paid him extra to come back later," he revealed. "What?" I blurted out, frowning. The man nodded before adding, "She told me she had heard about these satanic cults, unable to bear losing me or seeing me hurt, so she had scared me out of my independence. She apologized profusely, insisting it was all for my safety. But I was overcome by a sudden rage. I grabbed one of the pillows on the bed and I smothered her. Val bowed his head into his hands, his elbows resting on his knees, the shock evident. Alex glanced around the room for a few moments, gauging our reactions. For the first few minutes after she died, I was exhilarated. The feeling quickly shifted as I became incredibly lonely, followed by the familiar fear. I kept her body in that bed, trying to pretend as if she was still there with me, but her corpse's companionship wasn't enough to quell my fear. And as she started to smell a few weeks in, I had to dispose of her. But the loneliness and, more importantly, the utter dread only grew worse from there. A large lump formed in my stomach. And that's why I invited all of you here today, he admitted with a shrug. Because this is me taking control of my fear. I know my mother tricked me, but she was right. Just listening to your stories today, I'm more convinced than ever that the world is a dangerous place, especially when you're alone. With all of you here, I'll never have to be alone again. Cecily snorted, her tattooed arms crossed over her chest. You can't be serious, she objected incredulously. The man locked eyes with her in a cold stare. I can assure you I am quite serious, he replied matter-of-factly. Thomasine cried out and jumped from her seat, but Alex stopped her by grabbing her forearm tightly. Sit down now, he ordered through clenched teeth, yanking the girl back into her seat. None of you are leaving this room. I've completely secured the building. We have everything we need to survive here. Alex, Eddy said softly, tears having already slid down her painted face. You can't keep us here. He chuckled at Eddy's declaration. I can't. All of you have given me everything I need to ensure you stay put. I have intimate details about each of your fears, and I will use them against you. John stood up abruptly, kicking his chair over. God damn it, Alex, I'm not going to be held like some damn animal, he fumed. I'm getting out of here, and I advise all of you to follow me. The corpulent man turned towards the door, his worn tennis shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor as he moved towards the exit. Alex withdrew a pistol from his back waistband and aimed it at John's back. No, I cried, but it was too late. 3 gunshots rang out through the room, deafening. Staggering forward, his legs buckling as he fell to his knees, he turned his head over his shoulder, dazed and shocked. You're kidding, right? John mumbled before collapsing forward onto the floor. John, Cecily shrieked, jumping from her seat to help him, though it was clear there wasn't much any of us could do for him. We had voluntarily left our phones outside the room to ensure privacy. Hesitantly, I snuck across the room to join her, watching the gun for any sign of movement. When I safely reached John, the others followed soon after. We formed a circle around him, together mourning the fallen man we barely knew. Alex walked towards us slowly, chuckling as he pointed at the gaping wounds that tore through John's upper back. Hey, do those holes scare you, Eve? We remained in that room for months under Alex's watchful eye. He buried John in the churchyard where he had buried his mother before we got there. Cecily tried to escape several times, but he hadn't been lying when he said he had secured the old church. The surrounding area was secluded anyway. Each time she tried to venture out, Alex locked her in a closet, alone, with only a clock. The sound of her screams broke my heart. While Cecily grew more defiant in the face of her captivity, I grew weak, silent, subservient. Apparently, this was a trait Alex found appealing because he favored me. Seeing that I never resisted and had one less hand to fight with, Alex grew to trust me more than the others. He allowed me small allowances for my obedience. A pen and paper so I could write the book I always meant to write, a packaged cupcake after dinner, the opportunity to feel the sun on my face for a few minutes, and one afternoon, the chance to pick apples in the churchyard as the branches were heavy with fruit. Alex held the basket while I picked them. When the basket was full, I withdrew my folding knife, the one I had used to sever my own hand years earlier, the one I had hidden the moment Alex dragged John's body from the room from my pocket and plunged it repeatedly into his neck. He tried to fight back, but he wasn't prepared. I was ready. I had been steeling myself for that very moment since John fell to the ground. Alex, I cooed as he collapsed to the grass, surrounded by bruised fallen apples. You'll never have to be alone again. The first time I killed, it was an accident, and I was consumed by guilt. The second time I killed, it was deliberate, and I felt nothing at all. I released the remaining members of the group, but we haven't gone home, as if any of us had a real home to go back to anyway. We came here in a final desperation for normalcy. We came here because our fears had taken everything from us: family, friends, a sense of safety. We decided to stay here instead, in a place we could adapt to suit our needs, to those who understood the need to do so in the first place. Thomasine happily smashed the bathroom mirrors to quiet the incessant thumping. I helped Eddy board up the basement door to block the only staircase in the church. Cecily crushed every damn clock in the building with the heel of her shoe. Tegan converted the broom closet into a bedroom. She thanked us as we locked her in each night. We searched the building for figure eights, destroying each one for Val. If he found another one somewhere, one of us was always nearby to pat him on the shoulder, bring him back to us. We dug up John's body, freeing him from the darkness underground. We burned what was left of him in a pit we gathered for later. We laid him to rest in the base of a glass lamp that we always keep lit. The light will never go out for John again. We buried Alex in the churchyard next to his mother. We couldn't decide if this was kindness or punishment, but it seemed fitting. My own phobia might be more difficult to adapt to, but Cecily holds me until the anxiety passes each time I'm triggered, the gems adorning her eye patch touching my face as she presses gentle kisses to my lips. We have lived here for a year now, only leaving for necessities. I understand this may not be the ending you expected, but I want you to know that we are happy here. Cecily is not tortured by incessant ticking. Thomasine doesn't have to hide from her reflection. Val doesn't lose time. Eddy can finally walk comfortably on solid ground. Tegan doesn't have to fear what she will do outside of her awareness. John will rest eternally in the light, and I have all of them. I wake up to Cecily's radiant smile each morning. I share cigarettes over tea with Tegan in the afternoon. I tell Thomasine she is beautiful every day. Sometimes I even let her do my makeup. I spend hours in conversation with Val, whose intelligence is unparalleled. Eddy makes me bourbon and water for our daily happy hour. I have built a relationship with her that fills a hole in my heart, the hole that formed when my own grandmother passed away before I stopped using drugs, before I could tell her how much she meant to me. I place my hand on John's lamp to absorb the warmth radiating from within it before I go to sleep each night. So please don't feel sorry for me or for any of us. We are not trapped here anymore. We choose to stay. Here we are safe from the world, and the world is safe from us. Together, we have built a world where we can support each other forever. Together, we have built a world without fear.